Thank you for your leadership on this council. And yeah, it has been 4 terms. It has gone by fairly quickly, I guess. In some ways, it hasn't. It's really been it's been an honor. It's been a privilege. It's a lot of hard work, and it's been an awful lot of fun. Otherwise, I wouldn't have stayed on this doing this work on behalf of the community for so long. And what really makes it fun for me and enjoyable and profitable is the relationships I've struck with my council colleagues. It's no fun if that doesn't work, and so I've generated many friends over the years, and really always impressed with my colleagues who I can disagree with at the council table and still go out and have a beer together. So I think that's kind of how democracy is meant to work, and it certainly has worked around this this table. So yeah, and it's really been I've had an awful lot of fun connecting with our community in different capacities as well. So I won't say that I'm going to miss Monday nights entirely. I think I can find something else to do with myself on Monday nights. But really, so thank you to the council. Thank you to the staff. They're really a remarkable support to doing this work. They really are. Yeah, and thank you to the community for giving me this opportunity to serve for these terms. Thank you for the time, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ne. I have a little something for you. I know I'm going to do something more fun than this, I'm sure, after the, but not tonight as we're sitting at the council table. Thank you for that. I have a few other little comments before I get on to the business of the evening. And just a reminder that this Friday, the September 30th, is the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. There's a local event being held at the Oak Bay High School by Reconciliation Oak Bay. It starts at 9:30. And then there's the Songhees hosted sort of South Island event hosted by the First Nations, known as the South Island Powwow. That starts at 10 o'clock. The doors open. There's an opening ceremony at 11 and then a grand entrance at 12. There's actually a second grand entrance event at 6 p.m. as well. It's going all the way from 10 a.m. till midnight. So it's quite an event, and there'll be First Nations and non-First Nations coming from all over to attend it. So it should be quite an event. In their own words, the South Island Powwow is an opportunity to recognize survivors and their families in the spirit of reconciliation. Through song and dance, we will celebrate traditional Indigenous cultures and resiliency. So I encourage anybody who can to take the opportunity to go down to that. There's no cost to attend. It's just a community event. And Oak Bay is one of the sponsors for that as well. A few other points of note. I had the honor of attending the memorial service for fallen police officers. This is traditionally an annual event, and it was just a good sober reminder, particularly this year with the incident in Salish where the police officers were shot, about just how much the police contribute every day to our safety. And as I sit as the chair of the police board in Oak Bay, and it's really quite remarkable, the level of professionalism and service that we see from that organization. So just my extension of appreciation for that. Also, just want to express my appreciation to the community event that was hosted by Belker Creek Initiative and Community Association of Oak Bay around using cool kit principles this weekend on Sunday to look at biking pathways around the rec center and along Belker Creek and naturalization. And they served ice cream, which is always a good way to get people out. I was at the police ceremony, so I wasn't able to go to both, so I think the ice cream was probably the more appropriate for the weather on Sunday. Of course, we have voting days coming up, so I just encourage anybody in Oak Bay to please make sure you vote. And I will finish by saying thank you to all of the incumbent councillors for all the service that you've put in over the last 4 years. You found a path through the pandemic to get through this all. And certainly with partnership with staff, it's certainly been an interesting term, and I've very much appreciated the opportunity to work with all of you. And of course, I would just like to express my wish everybody that's running this term the best of luck, and clean campaigns, and we'll look forward to the results. Whoever is elected, I'm sure, will serve the community very well. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Sorry, Mayor, I think it's important to also say that congratulations to you for being acclaimed as mayor.
No, thank you. Yes, my calendar's opened up a little bit. So thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. So moving on to public comment and question period. I just want to invite, this is a chance that we have, if there's items on the agenda that you're here to speak to or online and wish to speak to, this is not the appropriate time, but if there's other items that are not on the agenda for speaking to, we would invite you to. This is just a chance on any items related to Oak Bay. There's a few restricted topics, but if you flag them, I'll make sure to let you know. They're just really land use items that have a more formalized process. If there's anybody online, I'd encourage you to just raise your hand within the Zoom app. If you're called into the 188 number, sorry, 1855 number, you would at this point hit the *9 to raise your hand, and we'll see you on the system. I don't see anybody calling in on that front. So I'm going to give this just 15 or 20 seconds to give a chance for people, if they were watching the live stream on YouTube and wanted to hop in, that this gives them a chance to get to their phone, dial the 1855 number that's in the agenda package, hit the meeting ID, hit the passcode, and then hit *9. And again, it is *9, not #9. We've had a couple of incidents where people said, "I'm hitting #9," but not the right code to get in. And sometimes because there's a lag, we're always a bit easygoing on this. If there's people who come in late, we'll try and make room for people because we always want to hear if anybody wishes to address council. But I do not see hands popping up at this point. So I'm going to move on, and if someone does manage to get through, we'll just make an effort to get back. In the interest of moving things forward, I'm going to move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the Oak Bay Tourism Committee Strategic Plan. And I believe we have Ms. Madone and Mr. Bolson here from Oak Bay. Ms. Palan, what did I say? Oh, sorry. Ms. Palan, hello, Madone. Sorry, I'm too often in the first. If you could, yeah, just come up to the speaker's podium. And we just asked if you could just push the button on the microphone and then just state your name, your organization, and then I believe you have a presentation to provide for council.
Wonderful. So is the microphone working? Fantastic. Good evening, all, and good evening, Mayor and councillors. My name is Madone Pellin. I am the chair for Oak Bay Tourism, as well as the general manager for the Oak Bay Beach Hotel. And I'm joined today by Brian Dolson, who is our finance chair for Oak Bay Tourism. And we are here this evening to present our 2023 budget, which is derived from our 5-year plan. And I believe we have a deck that should be available for you to view. And I'm not sure, will you have that up on the screen?
We'll give it a moment to pop up on the screen.
Sure.
We need some of that Jeopardy hold music to help us through that. So I think it pops immediately into your head as soon as you say that.
First off, I would just like to say a big thank you to Councillors Hazel and Karin for their immense support over the last couple of years. This will actually be the first time we've had to present a budget since I've taken over as chair 2.5 years ago. So this is a first, and thank you for all of the support, especially this past year. It has been an interesting time for sure, especially for tourism. So on the agenda for today, and I understand we have 10 minutes allotted, so I will try and keep it as succinct as possible. Our agenda includes our review of our 5-year plan, mission, vision, objectives, strategies, and highlights from 2022, how we spent our money, our budget for 2023, and how we plan to spend that budget. So it should be fairly straightforward and great. So moving on to the next slide, I think we've just covered that. Wonderful. So our Oak Bay Tourism Committee is made up of myself as the chair. Our vice chair is Duncan Murphy, and treasurer Brian Dolson, who's here with us today, and our council liaisons, of course, as I mentioned, Karin and Hazel. Our committee members are Ken Agat, Joan Peggs, Steve Earnshaw, Jeff McKay, and Rob Jennings. Wonderful. Next slide. So MRDT funding. So the MRDT tax is what completely funds our tourism committee outside of any grants that may be awarded to us throughout the year. So Oak Bay Tourism is fully funded by the tax collected from the municipal and regional district tax program. The intent of this tax is to assist designated recipients to fund tourism marketing programs and projects. This is a 2% tax assessed on rooms revenue collected by all hotels and submitted to the province. And of course, in Oak Bay, there's only one hotel now, which is my other hat at the Oak Bay Beach Hotel. There's also funds collected through short-term rentals, such as Airbnb, which would be legal short-term rentals in Oak Bay, but funds do show up on that line item at times. It's completely opaque. We have no idea where it comes from, but there is a little bit that comes in from that front. Moving on to the next slide. So we have revised this mission statement slightly to be more aligned with what our next 5 years look like, which is to support the sustainable tourism that will enrich our community's well-being and the quality of life for residents and stakeholders. We felt that new messaging really would help drive that overnight tourism by providing authentically local experiences to guests that come to Oak Bay. The vision has stayed pretty much the same. We've just tweaked it slightly. So Oak Bay is a coastal community at the southernmost tip of Vancouver Island. It is renowned for being rich in arts and culture, nature, and locally fresh cuisine throughout all 4 seasons, as well as its historic significance to the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And then the overall goals and objectives for us over the next 5 years can be summarized in 5 points. To ensure our actions are responsible and sustainable so that what we do today can still be done in 50 years from now, really looking at preserving what makes our destination unique and special, maintaining and improving Oak Bay Tourism's visibility in the community, and demonstrate how our efforts have a positive effect on the quality of life of residents. And we've begun by putting together newsletters that will be sent out to our stakeholders monthly and really focusing on more communication around that. Improve and maintain access to the community with transportation and wayfinding. Drive shoulder season visitation by executing effective and measurable marketing campaigns, and then increase stakeholder engagement and alignment with regular stakeholder communications and opportunities for learning and development and collaboration.
Our slides have fallen a little bit behind. I'm not
Oh.
sure where the, keep going,
Oh, sorry about that.
get on to strategies. There we go.
There we
Thank you.
go. Okay, all caught up now. Any questions from the first few pages? No? I'll carry on then. And then strategies. Develop and begin to execute a sustainable plan guided by the UN Sustainability Development Goals. So there are 17 sustainable goals that are recognized globally that were set forward by the UN. We are looking at different ways of becoming certified as a DMO for sustainability. There are a few options out there, and from Oak Bay Beach Hotel, we're undergoing a sustainability certification right now that may help encourage or direct which certification Oak Bay Tourism may look for. Regardless, we will be trying to align ourselves with those sustainable goals put out by the UN so that we're all speaking the same language. Continue to advocate for Turkey Head development. It has come up both as one of our greatest areas of opportunity for tourism and also one of our greatest risks to tourism. Should it go undeveloped into the future, it could be a detriment to tourism into Oak Bay and the potential there. Continued improved access into Oak Bay, effectively marketing the destination, support meetings and events, partner with Indigenous tourism, engage with our stakeholders, and increase partnerships and pool resources. And we can move to the next slide. So 2022 highlights, and this is really fun. This is where we get to brag a little bit about what we do and the successes of the past year. And I feel like we've had a very, very successful year in how we've allocated the funds to get the greatest return. We invested in asset development. So we received a grant that was secured through Destination British Columbia, specifically for asset development, which meant we had a chance to update our video and imagery library and just get some new content. Some examples are there up on the slide.
You mentioned the mayor didn't take any pictures this time.
Okay. Great. Continuing on, so we had a very strong digital ad campaign for spring, fall, and winter. And over on the right-hand side, you can see some snippets of what that digital ad campaign looked like. So these are ads that would pop up and follow you around a little bit if you're searching for different things online. National coverage with a TV campaign and the Globe and Mail in late 2021, encouraging winter and spring bookings. Fulfillment participation publications with Destination Greater Victoria Visitor Guide, so we participate in that. And our travel trade efforts in the UK with a catalog essentially that partners with Destination Canada and something that's called Selling Canada. So we partnered with them in having a spot for Oak Bay in how they market to the UK. Additional highlights, we continue to focus on our social media channels, which is an incredibly cost-effective way of marketing, and continue to grow those. Hopefully you've had a chance to follow us and can see what we are doing. Media relations, we hosted several media and influencers throughout the past year in partnership often with the hotel, and really wanting to feature Oak Bay as a destination and featuring many of our stakeholders along the way. The next slide. And then the next one, there we go. We've distributed over 20,000 brochures that have been updated at key entry points and events. So that includes the Visitor Centre, the airport, BC Ferries terminals, Coho Ferry, the hotel, the marina, Boker Creek Brush Up, and the marathon, just are some of the events and locations they were distributed through. And then the next page. Stakeholder relations. So we've been working on updating the stakeholders lists, implementing regular newsletters, partnering with multiple stakeholders to build out more robust FAM tours, which is a familiarization tour, inviting clients, whether they're meeting planners, media, to come to Oak Bay and host them to see our destination. And supporting events such as the Brush Up and Half Marathon. We are also sponsors of the South Island Powwow and Arts Alive, as well as many others. So that was a quick review of 2022. Any questions on that before we move forward? Okay, so the budget for 2023 has also been submitted, and that is a separate full document that breaks down in great detail where the funds are going, but just a quick highlight of the budget. Here on the first page of, we anticipate a carry forward from this year of about $120,000, and that's partially due to us exceeding our expectations this year. The hotel has done very, very well, and therefore the taxes we collect have done very well as well. And we anticipate next year to collect of that 2% about $150,000, and that is still kept conservative with a few unknown factors on the horizon, just with potential recession in the talks. That may impact travelers. We do not have any anticipated grants or co-op marketing revenues at this time, but there certainly can be opportunities to claim those later on. So total revenues for the 2023 budget is $270,000. That includes the carryover and the MRDT. And then the next slide is for how we plan on spending those expenses. Roughly broken out is $148,000 for marketing, and there's an entire subsection of what those marketing expenses are in your full detailed report. And then we have destination and product experience management at $29,850, and meetings, events, conventions, sports, and other. This is one that has not been in our budget previously, but we felt was necessary for us to include moving forward. And one of the key reasons why there were some funding opportunities that Destination British Columbia put forward, and it was only valued. It was only attributed to those destinations that had highlighted some expenditures for meetings and events. So therefore, we did not qualify for some of these larger grants this year. So total expenses of $210,650. That leaves us with the contingency of $59,350. And that is the summary. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. You were just over 10 minutes.
Oh,
We'll
sorry.
allow that to happen. That was very well done. Thank you for the overview. And yeah, we always appreciate. It's nice having you back, honestly, as our Bay Tourism back to present. Are there any questions before we move to proceed? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. And an excellent presentation. Thank you so much for the wonderful work you've done. I'm sad to see that the unicycle or whatever that device that was used 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago.
Is it our
before the pandemic.
bicycle?
Yeah.
We still have it.
But it was in the material. Sometimes it was featured on the front page.
Yes.
So I'm sad to see it gone. But still, it's beautiful, beautiful assets you got here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you. And I really don't have any questions. I just want to commend both of you for your leadership over the past term and particularly through COVID. I know tourism in particular took a huge hit financially and in every other way. So I have been so impressed. And the kind of support you've provided to this community generally, and I really appreciate it. So as much as you enjoyed working with me, I found it a distinct pleasure to work with all of you. So thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you.
Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. I would reiterate those comments by Councillor Green, and also just to let everyone know that the tourism community was also behind the car show, which was on the Avenue, which was so well attended, and it's a real mainstay, and it's wonderful to have the tourism committee support that. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. I don't see it. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation. You did mention on a couple of points there that there was a more detailed report available, and it's not actually in our current package. So I'm going to assume it's forthcoming, but I'm interested in taking a look at it. So I'm going to assume we're going to receive it for information, Your Worship, at some point in the future.
Yes,
Ms.
I believe
Glenn?
it was sent out last week, and I know you had forwarded the 1 year as well, right?
Yep.
Okay.
We will track that down and make sure.
Happy to resend. Yeah. No
We
problem.
can perhaps just check it. It should form part of our agenda package if it should be there. So
Okay.
there's no recommended motion here. It's
Okay.
really just to should we have a motion to receive the presentation? Is that fair? Go ahead, Councillor Green. Move proceed. Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Don't see any. I just will express again up front. Be happy before I call the question. Thank you
All right.
so much for all the work that you're doing, and I know that committee works very hard to bring
Thank you
people
very
here.
much.
So thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. You're welcome to stick around and watch the ongoing theatrics, or you may leave. We're moving on to our bylaws, section 8 in the revised agenda, which is bylaws and permits. So we have 3 items. 8.1 is items citing and design for 3080 Beach Drive. This is so I believe we have a member here, but Mr. Bowl, who's the Director of Community Building and Planning, will be doing an introduction. Welcome, Mr. Bowl.
Thank you, Your Worship. A short introduction, and Mr. Weber is available as well, the planner, who is most familiar with all the details. But this is an uplands siting and design permit in front of you to consider the plans for the construction of a new single-family home at 3080 Beach Drive. Has been reviewed by the advisory design panel, and further information is provided in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll go to questions of council. And just for those watching at home who aren't familiar with our processes, Uplands has a unique scenario in which when the original developers handed it over to the municipality, there was this provincial law put in place that requires siting and design of buildings to be approved. It used to be done at a committee when they were separate, and now it's been at the council level for the last 90 years or so. So we're here to just to do a review, and it's gone through a setting and design panel prior to coming here. Are there any questions of the applicant or staff? I don't see any questions. I guess I will take a motion then. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Move the staff recommendation, Your Worship.
Thank
I'll
you.
second.
That's to receive and to approve the setting and design application. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. We also next have section number 8.2, 1787 Elgin Road. Mr. Bowl.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Similarly, another form and character permit. This one is a regular development permit under our regular design guidelines. This is for the site at the end of Elgin Road. It's an existing building, the Elgin Gardens, and the siding needs replacement, and that's what's being proposed. Slightly different color scheme, also reviewed by the advisory design panel and in front of you for consideration of approval.
Thank you, Mr. Bull. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I will move the staff recommendation to approve.
And seconded. That allows us both comments and questions at this point. Any questions for the applicant or for staff? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I attended the meeting. I just wanted to say that the committee or the panel rather, was impressed with the kind of upgrading that was going on for this building, long overdue, and they're making a number of improvements, as well as to cool and provide other quality of life improvements to the building. So thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to ask whether staff is aware. I understand that there's a public access laneway beside it that basically leads sort of over to Parks, Rec and Culture. Is there any indication of that public access way being improved as part of this work, or just I have no idea, but I thought I would ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Weber, do you? They're separate parcels, as I understand it. But is there any? You can just probably a yes or no question. Is there any changes happening to that walkway as part of this application?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and good evening, everyone. No changes are proposed for that public access, I believe, on the east side of the property. Thank you.
You go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Yes, I agree. It's on the east side. So a question through you, Chair, to staff in general. Will staff be taking advantage of the work being done on this property to possibly improve the access way through there, since there are some pinch points and it is probably difficult to get a bicycle through there at times? Thank you.
I'll give it to you, Mr. Weber. I think the short answer to that is probably that would be an engineering question more than a question for building and planning. But do you have any insight of conjoining work?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I've heard nothing from engineering about a joint venture such as that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just thought I'd ask if something might be possible. Maybe the next council might consider a notice of motion in this area, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other questions or comments? We have a motion on the floor. Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Oh, if they were all so easy. Moving on to 8.3, we have a parking facilities amendment bylaw. This is an amendment that came through a couple of previous councils. We had to revert it to make some changes. We had a debate on that. Third reading was taken, so this is up in front of us for adoption. It's unlikely we're going to have any changes of minds. Move adoption. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Is there any? Go ahead, Councillor.
I just have a question. Just for clarification, if staff could just clarify the implication of this to the driveway bylaw. My understanding is that this will then nullify what was ever the amendments that made in the driving bylaw, but I'm just wondering if we could get clarification for the purpose of the public interest on that point.
That was a motion that we had referred back to staff to ask engineering if they saw a net benefit in keeping the wording changes, because there may be some incidents outside of the secondary suites that I might still want to do, and I don't think they've been able to provide a report on that yet. So, Mr. Bull, I don't know if you have any a timeline update of when that might come back to us.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We spoke with our colleagues at this point that that particular wording was specific to secondary suites, so there's no current or urgent need to maintain that wording or keep that bylaw moving forward. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that takes care of it.
Thank you. I think procedurally it was sitting at second reading and then we referred it back to staff. We may have to bring it back at some point. I guess it just dies if it doesn't come back to this table. Okay, thank you. On the bylaw in front of us, sorry, we have in front of us for adoption. And we already had the debate, but just for clarity, I will be voting against this. I do feel like the previous version we had was was the superior, but at the end of the day, the majority rules here. I just want people to understand we've had a very fulsome debate. We've had a chance to make our arguments, and I don't need to reiterate them at this point. So thank you. Councillor Braithwaite.
And that would be the same as me. I don't want to reiterate my arguments for voting against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
I'd like to move the motion that
It's already been moved.
Thank you.
It's been moved for adoption, I believe. We've had the motion on the floor. Yeah. Moved and seconded. So any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Braithwaite and Mayor Murdoch opposed. That carries. And that is really the last portion of the secondary suites piece of the puzzle, aside from some procedural updates in the back end for the public. We're moving on to section 9, which is the infill housing strategy. I think there's a few people here in the audience that are here maybe for that, but we'll allow Mr. Boole to introduce, and just for all of you here or online that wish to address council, this is available for public input, but just procedurally here, how we manage this process is that we'll do a presentation from staff. We'll have the opportunity for council to ask questions. At that point, we will, after following the questions, we'll open up for public input. We'll take any public comment, and then concluding the public comment, we will come back to the table for council's consideration of potential motions. So there we go. That's the process. If you're watching on the live stream and you wish to call into the 1855 number and the agenda, I would suggest you do it now, and just hit the *9 to raise your hand, and that way you'll be in our queue to speak at that time. So with that, I will introduce Mr. Boole, who is again our Director of Community Building and Planning. Welcome back, Mr. Boole.
Thank you. Consultant Sarah Adams, who has helped us with setting up the survey and also analyzing the results. The first part of the presentation about the infill housing strategy, the engagement summary and next step. This is the outline of this presentation tonight, an introduction with some context and process to date. Second part is by Ms. Adams, specifically zooming in on all the results. And at the end of the presentation, I will give an overview of the next steps and the ideas we have for that. First of all, then, to introduce this item and provide some context. The context goes back quite a while, and this is something that struck me when I was reading up on our official community plan this summer when I arrived. And back in 2014, stock was taken of trends in the community, and one of those trends is surely still in progress: age distribution and income levels, age going up, but also average incomes. But it also means that some of that related to not having any changes in your housing stock. Your community is actually changing. And I wanted to note that because that's a bit of an, as planners we're aware of this because we're constantly working on the next steps in the future. But sometimes you hear people in the community a desire to keep things the same. But unfortunately, if you talk about housing and communities and how they are, what the makeup is of a community, I think it's very important to note that that is always changing slowly but surely. So I thought it was very relevant background here. It doesn't mean that we need to go full on with any changes, of course. It means that we need to consider what kind of changes is good for this community. So that's the context I would like to raise there. The second part, the housing needs study from 2020, built on that and noted a couple of things. Increasingly, levels of unaffordability in the housing options for more and more residents, also lack of rental and homeowner options for specifically working households, limited options for seniors who may need to downsize or access housing support. I hope this is not in the way. Oh, good. It's not. Need for support for new housing developments and also a discussion, I think, about where that would be and what kind of housing development is appropriate. And finally, with the proximity and having half of the University of Victoria campus inside our boundaries, but also other educational institutions nearby. There's also specific post-secondary students and staffing housing needs there. So this brings us to the housing framework, something that Council has identified as a priority and something that is being worked on for a couple of years already. It's based on the official community plan's housing policy directions, and more specifically, more recently, on a couple of initiatives that this Council has started and is intending to, has identified for the near future. The housing needs report, which I was just referencing, but also the secondary suite study, which was completed, and we just completed actually bylaw changes to introduce secondary suites in our bylaws. This particular presentation is about the infill housing strategy project. Other pending projects for the near future are village area plans and the zoning bylaw review, and that is all part of the housing framework. Now, zooming in on this project and the infill housing strategy, just a quick reference to previous rounds, and I just labeled them and numbered them this way because they were referenced that way earlier. But in round one, which was the end of last year and early this year, that phase of the project was called neighborhood exploration, and community input was collected on the types of infill housing that people would like to see, and there was also policy review and a technical analysis, which included an Oak Bay Atlas, which gives backgrounds and an analysis of what we're working with today. Round two explored in more detail infill housing options, collected input on ideas in different ways. There were all kinds of engagement initiatives, and that resulted in the guiding principles and key directions, a document that was presented to Council in June, and which is also in the current package in a slightly updated form. But in round three, the last item here on this slide, this summer we've spent time to do follow-up engagement with our community and to get more input on the proposed principles and key directions and on preferences by neighborhoods, and that's where particularly the community survey is front and center today. This community survey has been promoted through social media, through a one night at the night market, displays at 4 different locations, and I think most mail out to all Oak Bay addresses, something that Council specifically asked for in June when you consider the results to that date. That has been very successful, and we've received a total of 1,630 submissions. And that is a very high response rate for surveys like this, and we're very happy with that as staff, and it shows the interest. It also gives a lot of information for us to work with, so that is in large part thanks to the postcard. And then secondly, part of round 3 engagement was also updating and informing our advisory bodies, and the Heritage Commission, the Advisory Design Panel, the Advisory Planning Commission, they all had a chance to learn more about this project and to provide comments, and those the minutes, development minutes, are attached are included in the report. So turning then in more detail to the round 3 community survey results, I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams has extensive experience in data analysis and a number of other items. I'm going to stop share because I had some notes about this. Sorry about that.
Well, welcome, Ms. Adams, and let Mr. Bull continue his introduction here in a second. But it's nice to have you with us. Go ahead, Mr. Bull.
I'm losing my notes here. That's not good.
This is Murphy's Law at work. As soon as you're tasked with doing it.
One of the specific things I wanted to mention is that Ms. Adams worked for BC Stats, has extensive experience there, and more lately has worked as a consultant, continuing to work and advise the province, but also municipalities. And yeah, this is one of the things that she thrives at. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to her and ask for her presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Bull, and welcome, Ms. Adams. It's nice to have some the expertise in the room, or virtually in the room, so welcome.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I'm just going to share my screen here. Let's see if we can make all of this work. Okay, and then we'll do this. Okay, I can't actually see the screen anymore, so can you see my screen?
We can. It's clear as day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, let's walk through this. So as a quick overview, I'm just going to do a little bit of background on the survey, and then we'll dive into the results. So in terms of the survey design, we used the district used a self-selection sampling technique. So all Oak Bay residents were invited. It was also open to some non-residents who wanted to participate. These participants chose to take part. They weren't actually approached. So despite the fact that like cards were handed out, people chose to take part in it. So it wasn't like, as they call a convenience sample, it was a self-selection sample. That's actually better than convenience sample. The questionnaire used a consistent 5-point scale across all the questions. So going from strongly oppose all the way to strongly favor, and it gave people quite a wide range of ability to express their opinions. As Andre mentioned, the mailbox postcards were quite popular. So overall, almost 50% of people said that they had heard about the survey through the the mailed out postcards. And then another quarter of people said that they had heard about the survey through social media. Now, people were able to actually pick several, like as many as they had. And so people had heard about the survey through several different channels. The survey was open for just under 6 weeks between the 26th of July and the 5th of September. 1,630 surveys were received. 3 actually came in too late and we couldn't include them in the analysis. And then there were 5 blank surveys that just had no information in them at all. And so they were excluded from the final count. So there are 1,622 valid surveys. Across the survey, we also asked for some demographics, so their age, which neighborhood they lived in, housing situation, so whether they owned or rented, the household composition, who did they live with, and then the current home that they lived in. So we'll just touch on the survey population first, and then we'll get into the actual results. So by age, it's like a fairly equal distribution, not very many in the under 30. The 50 to 69-year-old group was fairly well represented. In terms of housing situation, over 80% of people in the survey owned their home, and only 12% were renters. Looking at the current home, most of the participants were living in a single family home. And then you had the rest of people sort of distributed across apartments, duplexes, secondary suites, etc. All the demographic questions had the opportunity to say prefer not to say, because that's an optional answer. And then in terms of household composition, most people were living with their partner. About almost half of those were living with their partner and some children. 11% live alone. And then there was a variety of other, situations. In terms of participants by neighborhood, you actually had quite a lot of people across almost all the neighborhoods. Harling Point is the smallest number of participants, but also the smallest neighborhood. But you actually have quite strong representation across all of your neighborhoods. So overall, almost 1,400 people provided their neighborhood. Some people said they were unsure. Some people said they were outside of Oak Bay, and then about almost 120 said that they preferred not to say. And then 16 people did actually skip the question, because you could also skip the question. So because we weren't using a probability-based sampling method, we wanted to check that the survey population, the people that we got answers from, was at least, we wanted to compare it to the overall Oak Bay population. So we checked it against the census. So you can see here on the left, that's the proportions in terms of how the census of the 15,690 over 15-year-olds in Oak Bay net out. And so you can see here that the under 30 group in the survey is underrepresented, and there's the 30 to 49 group is a little overrepresented, but I would say overall it's fairly representative. And you've got about a 10% sample in terms of the number of people in the sample versus the population. So that's pretty good. Okay, so in the responses, we've actually used 2 different scales. So, and you'll see this in the report. The 5-point scale is what people were originally asked in the survey. So strongly oppose all the way to strongly favor. That produces a lot of data. So in in a lot of the sort of more detailed tables, we actually roll together the 2 ends. So you've got strongly oppose and somewhat opposed are combined into percent oppose, and the same thing on the favor side. So then you have a 3-point scale, which just kind of allows you to see patterns, but all of the detailed tables are available in the report. We have a full appendix with all the detailed tables. So I just wanted to explain how that was. So in some of the graphs we're going to look at today, we're going to see the full 5-point scale, and in some of them, we're going to see the 3-point scale. So we're going to start off with the guiding principles. So in this graph, we've got the oppose strongly and somewhat are on the left. The favor strongly and somewhat are on the right. The stronglies are the more intense colors. And I've just dropped a yellow line down there, and you can see that about 70% of people favor the principles, all three of them. The proportion is slightly higher for principle three, cherish what the community loves, and principle 1 and principle 2 are fairly similar. And it's interesting, as you know, as a person who has a lot of experience in surveys, to see the high proportion of people who strongly favor, who strongly anything. Actually, one of the things that I really noted in this survey was that people weren't afraid to provide their opinions. So they usually, we find that people will kind of use the middle range of the scale, and about like 20 or, you know, like a smaller proportion will use the sort of strongly ends of it. But in this case, we actually find that a lot more people were either strongly favoring or strongly opposing. So that's interesting. So in this case, you've got about 1 in 8 who are strongly opposing these principles, but you've got over 50% who strongly favor. And that is interesting as somebody who's seen a lot of surveys. And so I'm just going to go back in the report, you'll see we've broken it out by different demographics. We're not going to go through all that detail in here because it is rather a lot, but that's all in the report. Okay, so one of the things we did in the survey is we asked people which housing types they wanted to see. There's like the infill housing, and then there's an expanded set of ones in each neighborhood. So that generated quite a lot of data. So there's the 6 types down one side for the initial set, and then there's 5 more of an expanded housing type. So I'm going to walk you through 4 tables that are in the summary report, and then we're going to actually look at the neighborhood level information. So in the report, this is actually all on one page, but it's far too much for a slide. So in this one, this is just looking at the percent favor. So I haven't pulled in the oppose. This is just the percentage who favor. And this is showing you the results for all survey participants for the infill housing types. You can see them down the side. And then across the top is all the different neighborhoods. So the way to read this table is to say that 71% of all survey participants favor duplexes for Henderson. That's the first column on the left there. 56% of all survey participants favor duplexes in Uplands. So you can see across the whole table, I've included it in that average there, that heritage conversions, detached suites, and duplexes had the highest rate of people favoring, and large lot subdivisions and triplexes were lower, but the span isn't very much. I've used color here to highlight places where the percent favor, so in Uplands, we've got 3 that are orange, is 5% or more lower than the average, and blue shows you places where it's 5% or more higher than the average in a row. Okay, so next we're going to look at the expanded housing types. So same setup. In this case, there's more variability in opinion. So I've actually also used bolding. So bold orange will show places where it's 10 points or more below the average. So you can see 39% of all survey participants favor low-rise apartments in Uplands, which is lower than the 53 overall for low-rise apartments. In Oak Bay Avenue, 73% of all survey participants favor low-rise apartments for Oak Bay Avenue. And so you can see that there's quite a lot of variability. Across panhandle lots, secondary suites, and home conversions was a lot more uniform opinions. And so overall, there's the support for expanded housing types is a little bit lower, but it's still over half of people saying they favored these housing types. Okay, so now we're going to use the demographic data about location to dive in and look at what would people who live in those neighborhoods want for their neighborhoods. So in this case, we see some interesting patterns. So the way to read this again is 71% of Henderson residents favor duplexes for Henderson. 28% of Uplands residents favor duplexes for their neighborhood. So overall, the support for any of these housing types was much lower in Uplands, and it was actually much higher in Oak Bay Avenue, like quite a lot higher. And then if we look at the expanded housing types by neighborhood residents, we see a very similar pattern. So more people in Oak Bay Avenue favored low-rise apartments for their own neighborhood than the average. And when you actually compare the two, which we'll do in the next, you can see that people in Oak Bay Avenue actually more of them favored the housing types for their own neighborhood than the rest of people said for their neighborhood. So let's go have a look. So we're going to sort of look at the bookends first, and then we'll look all the way through them. So this is Oak Bay Avenue residents. So we've got survey participants at the top, everybody, and then we've got Oak Bay Avenue residents at the bottom. And so you can see here, so if we just look on the, let's look at one that's really interesting. So heritage conversions. So 68% of people favored those for Oak Bay Avenue, whereas 81% of Oak Bay Avenue residents favored that for their own neighborhood. And so the conclusion I draw from this is that Oak Bay Avenue residents were more in favor of a lot of these housing types. Now, if we look at the bookend, you can see here the growth in the orange. So this is uplands. And so there was a lot less favoring. There's a lot more who said oppose. And again, we have to remember that a lot of people said actually strongly oppose. So in this case, 3/4 of people were saying they opposed, and many of them strongly, many of these housing types. And you can see the difference if you look, just say down the expanded housing types, that while 39% favored, only 18% favored, 18% of uplands residents favored for uplands. So that's just interesting. Now we're going to move through the other neighborhoods as well. So we're going to start in here at Henderson. Overall, it's fairly similar, but there was more opposition for low-rise apartments and multiplexes in the residents than, say, for all survey participants thinking for Henderson. Estevan was actually, residents were a little bit more opposed, but kind of followed the general trends. In terms of North Oak Bay, again, also what the community wanted for North Oak Bay and what residents, it's a little bit lower support among residents, but fairly similar. In South Oak Bay, the profile between all survey participants for infill housing and for the residents was actually fairly similar, but there was a stronger opposition to the expanded housing types among among residents for sort of low-rise apartments and multiplexes in particular. And then Harling Point had some interesting things where there was much higher support among residents for panhandle lots, secondary suites, and infill housing and house conversions. And there was higher opposition among Harling Point residents for low-rise apartments and multiplexes. And then the support for duplexes was really high among Harling Point residences. So there's a lot to ingest there. And if you want to go in and see the actual breakdowns of like strongly versus somewhat, oppose and support, that's all in the Appendix C. Now we're going to look at questions about encouraging unit diversity. So there was 3 questions about this in the survey. I've sorted the table here, or the graph here, by the total percentage who favored. So it's broken out between somewhat and strongly, but I've sorted it by overall the blue. So it ranges from 59 at the bottom to 62 at the top, which isn't a huge range. There were some interesting patterns where renters and younger people were more in favor of these options than homeowners and older people. So there's a lot more information to dive into there, but there's over 50%, 6 in 10 basically are supporting these ones. Now you'll see here that there is still a large proportion of about almost 2 in 10 who strongly disagree with these. So then next we looked at, there's 2 slides here on regulation and process. We asked 3 different questions on kind of zoning and approval processes. 2 are on this page, and then we're going to look at 4 more on the next one. These ones had the highest support. So over almost 3/4 of favored rezoning sites with existing legal non-conforming duplexes. And then about 2/3 favored allowing certain housing types as permitted uses where the proposal meets the design criteria. So those were the highest level of support. Then we asked some specific questions about particular zoning things around floor area ratio, greater lot coverage, and then front and side yard setbacks. You can see here that about 50% favor the top three, so floor area, lot coverage, and setbacks, whereas the percent who favored dropped quite a lot for side yards. And you can see that the proportion who strongly disagreed with that was a third of people. Then we looked at parking trade-offs. And there's 8 questions that we asked here. And in the report, they're broken out by neighborhood. So there's a lot of data to move through here. So there was the highest level of support in terms of proportion who favor for tandem parking, supporting parking alternatives, ensuring that each unit has at least 1 off-street parking space, and then 2 off-street parking spaces. So these are the highest ones. But you can see here the range is from like 2/3 to less than half. And then if we go down to where there's lower support, so making parking dependent on the number of proposed bedrooms, or on transit. And so we asked, there was like lots of different pieces in here. This is around gets into sort of the implementation side of things, but questions around yard space, there was not a lot of favor for maintaining existing yard space. So there's a lot to kind of parse out in here. And then we asked them about some additional considerations. So providing incentives for people to retain and renovate existing homes had the highest support, over 3/4 favored that. Similar with providing incentives for people to retain buildings with heritage value. There was less support for allowing taller buildings, but it was still 6 in 10 favored this. But you can see there the higher proportion of people who both overall opposed and also strongly opposed there. So that's kind of an overview here. There's a lot more information available, as I said, in the report and in the detailed tables. And we've allocated some time here at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to hand it back to Andre to finish his piece, and then we can do questions at the end of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Adams. Welcome back, Mr. Bull.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll restart the presentation again. Need to make sure that Ms. Adams is completely stopped sharing her screen.
Have I?
Or maybe somebody can help.
Ms. Adams, I think you still have control of the desktop, perhaps. There we
Oh,
go. Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
There's a lovely backdrop, though, I have to say that.
Yeah, so to close the presentation about the results, I have a few more slides, and they relate to the different comments that were provided in the survey, because the survey results that Ms. Adams just presented were focusing on all the yes, no, and percentages. But there's also 3 opportunities in the survey to provide written comments, and this one is summarized through a technique called Wordle. It basically takes all the text that was provided and tries to distill what kind of words or things came up most frequently. And then it gets sized accordingly and cleaned up a bit, because sometimes it just picks up other words randomly. But this is what the answer was, the types of answers that came up around what type of info housing would respondents be interested in to live in themselves down the road, potentially. You can see it ranges widely from townhouses and just a regular house, and suite, and garden is mentioned there, and then some other smaller sized terms that have been used: cottages, lame houses or condo, carriage house on the top left side, and a couple of other terms that kind of reflect the type of ideas that people had around this. The second slide is the one about final thoughts regarding developing this infill housing strategy. And there were many comments. You already have an attachment with 78 pages and 2 columns and about 1,200 rows. A lot of material. On that particular material that is in the agenda today, these are the things that come up. Housing, of course, but also parking, some of the things that people are concerned about, and they would like to make sure that are carefully considered for before the program is created. And if you read the comments, maybe from my personal reading last week, it covers the full spectrum of the respondents. So you have people mentioning go faster, do more, but you also have people stating, well, hold on a sec here, this is very sensitive material and be very mindful of the changes that you're considering for the community. So that full spectrum is somewhat captured in here. Now there's a third one as well. It's not in the package today, but there is something that we noticed today. The table we provided you with actually was supposed to have a third column as well with other comments or related comments. There was a question in the middle of the survey that very much sounded like the last question, which I just showed you. And it was anything else you would like the district to consider. This particular Rodel diagram summarizes those comments. They're very similar to the other ones that were provided for the last question. But we'll have to, as staff, make sure we update that attachment and get the full and complete version to you. And apologies for that omission. In terms of the next steps then, the third and final part of this presentation, this is where the implementation plan needs to be discussed. And I have a couple of slides about the type of ingredients, so to say, that we'd like to consider and that staff intend to rely on for developing this implementation plan that we recommend putting together at this point. So it would prominently consider the survey input. We have so much input now, and it's by neighborhood. It's very rich. There's a lot to be digested there still and to consider for each of these housing types. As Sarah's pointing out, there are some interesting differences in where certain types of housing are desired or, on the opposite side, not desired at all. And that's very informative for this implementation plan. Second part, guiding principles and key directions. That's the document that you saw in June. It's included in a slightly updated version. Basically, what was updated in it today was, for today, is some description about what was done for the third phase, but also making it clear that there is a separate, more substantial phase still following, where the key directions, the principles, but also the community input, it needs to be processed, so to say, and it will inform next steps and future proposals that need to be considered by council, but also the community about how exactly are we going to do this. For example, if I take duplexes, there were certain preferences and concerns around duplexes, even to the neighborhood level. So we need to think about that before we can put together a proposal for council specific to duplexes. And as part of that process, I anticipate there would be bylaw changes. That it also means that there will be community input opportunities as well for those next steps. And there's a recap there of the key principles there. So what is underlying this next step and the strategy overall is providing these diverse housing options, support and ease of implementation, and cherish what the community loves. And those three principles, they require balancing for the implementation. And then finally, as part of a key part of creating an implementation plan, as planners, we need to look at right-sizing the process in relation to the impact. That's kind of the approach we intend to take on this. Impact in terms of amount of change. That's what we're talking about here. So, for example, a duplex, particularly an existing one, if we make changes to bylaws that allow that duplex to be renewed or maybe strata titled, that's a very limited impact. That building is already there. But on the other hand, if you think about low-rise apartments or to a lesser extent perhaps carriage houses, those are more substantial changes, and that also means something for the tools we need to use, because there's probably a higher level of scrutiny we would like to apply to those. So yeah, a couple of things that I listed there. So for limited impact projects or types of housing, we could look at bylaw requirements that simply can be checked off later, and then based on those bylaw requirements, somebody could get a building permit. In the category moderate, we're talking about things that require form and character review. Think about heritage conversions. Secondly, variances mentioned there. So if proposals cannot fit into whatever the framework is the district sets up, there needs to be more scrutiny, and in the case of variances, that means notification of neighbors. In the case of form and character proposals, that means advisory design panel, possibly advisory planning commission, and the heritage commission from time to time. And then finally, extensive changes. I'm particularly thinking about the additional housing options here, townhouses or low-rise apartments, multiplexes. Those are probably types of proposals that even in the future we want to think about either zoning bylaw changes that need to be following then. That's more of a traditional process, which would ensure that there is information meeting earlier in the process, for example, but particularly a public hearing. I think in those kind of cases would be important. But how exactly that plays out for which type of housing, that is something that still needs to be determined. But those are a couple of the ideas about how staff intends to draft an implementation plan for you. So in closing then, or getting to the recommendation in the report, is the direction we're seeking today is that Council confirm or indicate if there are changes needed, if the guiding principles and the key directions that have been formulated over the spring and the summer are endorsed or supportable by Council. And secondly, the recommendation to give us the go-ahead to start working on this implementation plan, so that, in this case, that will be the future council. The future council can look at what kind of bylaw and policy changes would be needed for each of these housing types and where would they be allowed or not. And also the second part of that, big part of that, is options for further engagement. And of course, this is staff recommending this as part of the process to date, but absolutely feel free to identify other directions or additional things you'd like to see be done. So those are the staff recommendations. So in closing then, so to recap this the presentation very quickly, started off talking about the housing framework that the district is putting together, and an infill housing strategy project is one of those components. We spent extensive time on the round 3 community survey results, looked at what came out of the 1,630 submissions. And we looked at the data both on supportive comments and concerns that were expressed, and that community-wide and neighborhood-specific input will be further analyzed. And as next steps to do that work and to follow up on it, we recommend to endorse the principles and directions and start drafting the implementation plan. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bull. It was very interesting on the statistical side of the equation. I'm going to go to questions of council. I just want to though start off by just thanking your staff and the consultants. There's a lot of work, and we all know and so just to get the responses and all 3 phases of the engagement, I really do appreciate that work, the efforts that were made. I just want to remind people at this table and the audience as well, both here and at home, that we're not really making any decisions here tonight. We're receiving this information. All of this will go to the next council to help inform that future planning that Mr. Bull spoke about. So we certainly welcome any additional input from the public here tonight, but we're not here to say we want this or that, and we're certainly not delving down into any of the details about specific housing forms or anything else that we want. It's really just this has been a mechanism to get the information back. So with that, I'll go to council. If there's, again, process-wise, if you're online and you wish to address council, feel free to raise your hand at this time and we'll get to you. We'll do questions of council. We'll go to comments from the public, and we'll come back to this table for, we'll take some motions and comments at that point. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson, and then Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor, and I would also like to echo my thanks to Mr. Bull and the district staff and the consultants that worked on this, and certainly all of our residents who came to the open houses and participated in the surveys, because certainly the information they provided helped us map the framework for this. One question that I do have is that everything we have done to date focuses on types of housing, but there's no conversation in this about sustainability and how, if we seek to go forward with this, how we will be considering sustainability, how we will consider BC's goal to have net zero emission ready homes, if the goals are to also raise perhaps the quality of the product that we are getting in the neighborhoods, in addition to quantity of buildings. So if Mr. Bull would perhaps give us some comments of any discussions that have taken place, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Bull, where would that conversation start to happen?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, definitely something we were thinking about, because that was also part of the guiding principles and the key directions. It's hard at this point to pinpoint it to specific housing types and what it might entail. I think there's some overall goals that we could achieve with any of the infill housing options. But also, we were wondering as staff, when it comes to the implementation type by type, there may be certain incentives that council could consider, specifically on the sustainability front, to kind of weigh or potentially incentivize certain sustainability measures for certain housing types, because maybe either the housing type is more preferable or it becomes a matter of seeking synergy between the two topics, because I think the infill housing strategy is focusing a lot on the housing options. But yeah, of course, there's the sustainability is a kind of an overall policy area we also need to work at, and how we do that through the housing options and how we create options for housing. I think opportunities for that that we still need to define and also get your direction on.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And if I can also just touch on something that I have been asked and not able to respond to, but certainly a question from many of the residents is, and it did come up in the presentation, that there's a strong desire to maintain the character of the community. Given that the community is pretty well fully built out, and the changes that will occur as building lots become available for one reason or another, how will the district actually have control over the form that housing will take as it's developed over time to actually ensure that we are maintaining the character, and if the team has given any thought yet to how that will be taken into consideration with some of these options.
Mr. Bull, obviously it's a huge question that was going to come back, but perhaps you can just touch at a high level.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and for you to Ms. Patterson. Yeah, that's it is. I think that's related to the topic of impact I was talking about, and trying to make sure that the housing types have an appropriate level of review and scrutiny. But I think at this point it's something that council and community still have full control over, in the sense that it still needs to be determined how exactly we implement this. So by the time we create certain options, say for carriage houses, that should set parameters by nature of adding carriage houses to properties. There will be some change, but I think through setting up the policy and bylaw requirements for that, we have a chance to determine what level of change or is appropriate there, and in a lot of these infill housing options, on the one hand, we're creating new options, but we're also having more control because something's happening that requires, for example, form and character permits and development permits. So it also gives us control over landscaping, which is something that wasn't really front and center today in the presentation. But particularly for development permits, there is control over what happens on the rest of the site beside the building. So that's something where you definitely still have control. And I think, but starting with the decision on later on for which housing types, what kind of options are made available.
Thank you for that. I will just add into that comment as well. Right now, there's no obligation to change the size or scale of the buildings. We could accommodate, instead of a 3,600 square foot house, two 1,800 square foot units in the same footprint without changing that form and character. So I think those are the things that are going to have to be considered as they sort of look at that. I have Councillor Braithwaite, then Appleton, then Zelka.
Thank you, Mayor. I have, I think, 3 questions, and I think they're mostly around the survey. I know that on page 26, it was really interesting to see the percentage of census population and the percentage of survey participant was so equal, and I'm wondering if that is a normal in other surveys that the surveyor has seen, and if 10% is also a normal response rate for other surveys that they've seen.
Ms. Adams, welcome back to the meeting.
Hi there. Yes. I mean, it is a good result in terms of, because we didn't, so if you use random sampling techniques, you would actually have a list and you would go out and you would design your survey so that you're picking people that would be representative. So you have control over who you're picking. In this case, because there was a lot of responses, it has ended, and a lot of people were engaged in it. It has gotten a great cross section of the population. So that's really great. It shows a lot of engagement in, in the topic. And I mean, the level, if you're doing marketing surveys, you'll get one response rate. If you are doing census surveys, it's a very different response rate. So it really depends. I mean, for the census, they do a lot of effort to get their high response rate. So, I mean, I would say that this is a good response rate for not having a list and, 6 weeks over the summer. Like, that's actually quite a strong response. I was pleasantly surprised.
Thank you. And on the same page, there's a paragraph that says in 2021 there were 17,990 people living in Oak Bay, a slight decrease from 18,094 in 2016. And I just wonder if you could address, because people might question why we had such a decrease of over 100 people in Oak Bay, but I think that was probably because Oak Bay Lodge. I could be wrong, but I'm thinking it's because Oak Bay Lodge shut down and we lost those residents. Do we know the answer to that?
Mr. Bull?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't think we have a lot of detail on that. I think Councillor Braithwaite's reason with the lodge being removed from the community definitely would have contributed to that. The other general trend that is happening is slowly decreasing number of people per household, so that might have weighed in as well. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, thank you. One more. I think that on page 41, if I can just flip to there really quick, just as an example, I think that it would have been really helpful. I mean, you have so much information in this. It's wonderful. I love going and looking at all the numbers. But on page 41, I think when you're looking at like the types, for example, it says the types of housing in Henderson, and you have the all survey participants, and then you have the Henderson residents. It might have been interesting to know how many residents there were in Henderson that answered that question on that page, just so that we can say, for duplexes, it was 24% against and 71% in favor. Well, was that 10 people answering from Henderson, or was it, do you know what I mean? Like, if it just was there so we could actually see and be reminded, rather than having to flip back and figure out how many people actually lived in Henderson.
I think that's a suggestion more than a question.
Yeah, a suggestion more than a question, yeah.
So, Ms. Adams, you're speaking, but your microphone is muted, so that has to happen once every meeting.
You'd think I'd know. I mean, yeah. So are you looking at the housing types?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there were 168 survey participants who lived in Henderson who answered that question.
Right, sorry. So I'm just suggesting that perhaps in the future we could have that number written on that page, so we don't have to flip back. I know that it's just a couple of pages further.
Oh, no, it's actually at the bottom. Should be at the bottom of that page on like page 19. There should be a little thing that says, like, at the bottom.
I see that. I did not see that before. Thank you. So then I will switch to a different question then really quickly. On page 38, it shows a map of the actual residents that answered. So, for example, in Henderson, 168 participants, North Oak Bay, 220 participants. What would have been really interesting as well for this would be to know how many people actually lived in that area. So is it 168 participants out of 4,000 people? Do you know what I mean? So then we could see a percentage there. So
I did look at, could we get census data down to to the neighborhood level? And I'm not sure, we looked at there's some, publicly available forward sortation areas and postal code things, but they didn't cross exactly the neighborhood areas. So if you wanted to know that, it might have to be a special request. I'm not too sure how that would happen, but yeah, you could ask BC Stats.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton, and then Zelka.
Thank you, Worship. I will actually cede the floor as Councillor Braithwaite asked my question.
Sorry.
You can submit a protest later. Councillor Zelka.
No, that's absolutely wonderful to make things nice and efficient. Okay, let me ask you just a couple quick questions. Through your staff, first of all, and I'll ask some questions about the report. The motion asks us to endorse. It doesn't ask us to receive. Could I ask, what is the difference, please? Since I heard also the chair say that we're not actually making a decision here. Please help me understand endorse.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Zelka. I think it's probably a question a number of people are asking is what does endorse actually mean in this case, Mr. Bowl?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you. Yeah, endorse. The reason we chose this word is we'd like to get council direction on the direction this project is going, the key principles and the guiding principles and key directions. But this is not a final document just yet, and not a final strategy. So there's no adoption of a plan or a strategy at this point. Simply receiving it would be different, because then it's just for information, right? So I think for us, from staff perspective, seeking endorsement gives us the assurance that relying on the key principles and the key directions will give us the direction we need to come up with the implementation plan.
I think we probably could use, for everybody watching and in the room here, just if you could just remind us, there's the 3 guiding principles and there's the key directions. Can you just maybe just review quickly what's encompassed within those for endorsement? Because it's certainly not details of the...
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me see. I got them here somewhere.
The Councillor Zelka said it's also summarized on page 122.
Yeah. So the guiding principles are to provide diverse housing options, to support ease of implementation, and the third one is cherish what the community loves. So those are guiding principles. And then key directions are... It's a number of ideas that are captured under 3 key directions: distributing infill strategically, and that's where the different housing types are identified, with the idea that we would figure out where they might be allowed in the district. So that's not determined where exactly. It's simply we intend to explore that. Secondly, to encourage unit type diversity is another key direction. And that relates specifically to incentives and also to considering or supporting housing at different price points. Thirdly, third key direction is to expand the housing types being considered. And that relates to the distinction saw in the survey, or in the survey results between the housing types we started earlier on with, duplexes, terrace houses, heritage conversion. The additional housing types are low-rise apartments, multiplexes, and other housing conversions, for example. Yeah, I think that's in a nutshell a recap of the guiding principles and key directions.
I believe you're right. I was following along, and that seemed to be them. So thank you for that capture. Councillor Zelka, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much. If I could refer staff to page 122 out of 240, it is making reference to the first principle of what's, I guess, you're being asked to endorse. And what I heard you say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that endorse kind of like is like we're going to set the course of the ship and then start sailing. And then it's going to have to cross the ocean, but the longer we wait, the harder it'll be to change things. But we're now going to start making decisions effectively. So endorse is setting the course as opposed to just receiving.
Mr. Bull?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that's a fair characterization. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. So with respect to that, on page 122 of the package, providing diverse housing options, in the breakdown of what that means, it actually indicates that based on, I presume, the survey results and everything else, it shows all of Oak Bay as being suggested for being infilled, including the uplands. It indicates established neighborhoods, but it also extends that even further into the uplands, which is, I understand, in RCP, not established neighborhoods. It's a different type. But I just wanted to confirm, the results suggested that the uplands was quite sort of opposed, and I'm not surprised also that Oak Bay Avenue, which is the built-up area, the most built-up area, was quite in favor of actually doing even more than the average. What was the criteria for, in this particular principle, to go with all of Oak Bay and not maybe on a neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis, which is what I was hoping we were going to do?
Mr. Bull?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that is not quite where we are just yet in terms of where particular housing types are going to be located. There is a map attached to the document, that is correct. Maybe I need to clarify what the next step is. We're going to work on an implementation plan and options, and it's more that we're using the results to date to base our proposals on. But at this point, we're not really set on any housing type anywhere in particular just yet. I want to make that really clear. This is a collection of housing type options, infill housing options. There is definitely the idea that they could be and should be considered anywhere. But however, as we know also from the community survey now, there are certain preferences and certain challenges for certain neighborhoods, and how that actually plays out for each of these housing types, that still needs to be determined. So I don't think if that's a concern, that direction is not provided today in specifics. It's more that this collection of housing types and the fact that we had all this community input, that is going to be the basis for a follow-up report where the implementation plan would consist of options for each of these housing types and particularly where they might be allowed and how, what kind of process. So that's the goal of the endorsement.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. And you anticipated my next question, because the question is when and where would we have the flexibility to say in the uplands, maybe we don't want it, or maybe want to scale down infill, but maybe on Oak Bay Avenue, we basically go crazy in a sense. I mean, I don't mean go crazy, but proceed with all of the options for infill. So you're suggesting that the next step when the big report comes back, we won't be at bylaws yet, we'll still be at more options on what to do, maybe on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis?
Mr. Bull?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. The first document back to council would be that it would be more specific. It would talk about different housing types and where and how, but in general terms still, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done to create those kind of policies and bylaws. So that document, which would outline, say for duplexes, this process and this geographical area, and for heritage conversions, it would be something else. But after that, the follow-up that needs to be taking place even after that report and your direction is to actually create bylaws and create the design guidelines and put the program together. That's really where the details will become very prominent and important to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Bull. And just for clarification here as well, those would also have public input to guide them, because there's a lot of detailed work that needs that public input to guide it well. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
And I presume through you and maybe to staff, this would be public input separate from the public hearing that may result at the end of this process?
I mean, ultimately, that public input process will be governed by the next council, but Mr. Bull, I think that's the intention here, is it not?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And the reason I mentioned public hearing is that the province, as we know from some of the rumblings through UVCM and AVICC, is intent on speeding up this whole process. And they've already created options for us to eliminate public hearings. They're creating options for us to eliminate development permits. And some of the presentations at UVCM suggested that they're wanting to go even further than this. I heard you say that in development permit process, maybe form of character, maybe at public hearing, we could have an option to maybe on a fine-tuned basis, even if we did approve, say, infill in one area, maybe we could have a development approval process where we could then say, it's reasonable here, but it's maybe not reasonable there. But if the province eliminates those permits, how could we then control or have at least input, or have the public have input? Please advise.
Mr. Bull?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. That's a bit of a harder question to answer. I don't know exactly what the province will put together. I noticed in the recent changes, though, and maybe that's reassuring. For example, the recent changes to the public hearing process, it's an option that local governments were given, that they could waive public hearings more easily for certain rezonings. So far the province has given us new options without necessarily telling us what to do. So I'm hopeful that will stay that case, but as I'm in the same position as council in that matter, I don't know what the province might or may not do.
I'm just going to make a clarification for the people in the audience here, but I think it sometimes gets lost, is that the municipalities are a creature of the province. We are essentially delegated authority of the province. So all of our zoning bylaws, et cetera, are implemented at the local level, but can be overridden at any time by the province. And that's been some of the rumblings here, is that doing something along the lines of what happened in California recently, where they just outlawed single zone or single family zoning completely across the state. So those are the rights that the province has. What they do in the future, we don't know. But just for that context, people are maybe wondering, why would we be looking at that? That's why, is because at the end of the day, they do actually have superpowers over top of us. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, and you're absolutely right. We are creatures of the province in that sense. Just a couple of final comments. The report makes reference to North Oak Bay. I've always heard of that area in the middle referred to as Central Oak Bay. So I always thought North Oak Bay is north of Uplands, that little sort of weird part beside UVic. But so the terminology, maybe just clarify, because I didn't understand what the report was talking about regarding that. But now I do, now that I've looked it up in particular. I do note the Uplands is a historical site, a national historical site, and it has special, very special form and character. I would be very surprised, although we do note that if it's a 0.4 FAR, many of the houses are 0.2 FAR. So technically there's room to grow from a zoning perspective, but because of their very special form and character considerations, I'm looking forward to seeing what staff might possibly be able to offer in that area, because I'm not sure we have much room, much latitude. Final point. Harling Point. I did notice the numbers were all over the place, where they really wanted some form and characters that were more smaller scale, but really negative on the bigger scale. I think that's quite reasonable, actually, since there's flooding concerns. If there's going to be a tsunami, they're going to get it first because they're closest to that part of the thing, and the king tides. It would make sense to keep scale small in the Harling Point, so I can understand the survey results if others are wondering. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. You're still with questions, and then we'll go to the public for comments. Councillor Patterson, you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, just a clarification, and my apologies to Mr. Boole if I missed this in the key directions, but also the possible amendments to the zoning and parking bylaws, including perhaps removing the requirements for covered parking. That's also included in it, and I take endorsement to be by definition exactly what it is: declaration of public approval or support of. So there's still some room to move. It's just supportive.
Thank you. And I think there's actually a number of options in there for the parking that have been identified. So not an endorsement of any one, just that suite of options. All right. I don't see other questions at this point. So I'll leave my questions alone. I'll go to the public here. We have members of the public in the space here, and we will go there first. Just as you heard tonight, we're not making the decisions on these pieces. So, what we really value out of the public consultation and the public input is just looking at additional information of things that you think should be highlighted or things that have been missed, aspects that should be considered in our future considerations. I think this is the chance to say it on the public record. It gets captured and then gets included for future councils as they're looking at some of these specifics. And this is, again, I would ask, because we're really still looking at the broadest phase of these, right? Like the potential types of housing, the pros and cons, the viability in various areas. So this is the start of that sort of narrowing it down and where that might fit. And so absolutely welcome those conversations, but we're not really here looking at the benefits or pros and cons of any specific housing type, because at the end of the day, some of these may not fit at all, but we just they're still included in the broader list. But if there's something you really want to say about something specifically, all comments are always welcome here, as long as they're respectful. So I have a speakers list, which I have now. Oh, there we go. I believe on this item we just have we have two people who had registered on here. I have first Trevor Cochran. I'm not sure if that's online or here, and then I have Marilyn Palmer also here. And so we'll take you two first, and then we have people who are online, and I'll take those hands. So we'll go to those comments first. We try and keep comments to about 3 minutes, but unlike a public hearing, we're not quite as dictatorial in those pieces. Our process, though, is fairly similar. If you could just state your name, municipality of residence, and then feel free to address council. And if you could just put your comments through to me and to council. Thank you very much, and welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. My name is Marilyn Palmer. I live at 3280 Uplands Road, the now much questioned Uplands neighborhood. I'm pleased to advise, this is a piece of information to everybody, really, which is the reason I'm here. I'm pleased to advise that our neighborhood has formed the Uplands Neighborhood Association so that we can provide an organized voice for matters that impact municipal government. Our purpose includes raising awareness of and providing information on issues that affect our neighborhood and its future, public processes, district services, policies, and elections, and providing a forum for members to identify, discuss, and resolve issues of common concerns to the neighborhood. After listening to this presentation for the last, Andre, hour and a half, to limit this to 3 minutes is like crazy making. So I'll just try to pare down my tiny little 3-minute speech that was supposed to work in 3 minutes. So let me just say, and this is all going to be subject to a great deal of conversation, I hope, going forward. As new president of the newly formed Uplands Neighborhood Association, I've not yet found anybody, and I've talked to a lot of my neighbors, who recalls having received information from the district on the infill housing strategy. And you're probably thinking, what the? So this is just how I'm hearing it as I walk around my neighborhood and talk to people at the handful of meetings that we've had so far. Many residents are not even aware of the consultation efforts that have been made by Dialogue and by staff, or the conclusions that have been drawn that appear to be about to launch into affecting our neighborhood. And we don't fully understand, due respect to Sarah, I don't know if she's still here, we kind of don't feel like they're valid or reliable conclusions. For us to hear that a certain percentage of our neighborhood is in favor of duplexes, triplexes, and heritage conversions is a big puzzle to everybody that I've talked to. And for those of you who know Uplands, you might be able to imagine why that's coming as a bit of a surprise. So we respectfully request that staff be instructed to undertake additional consultation with our neighborhood, either through our association or by other means, because we are not feeling at all confident that the information that's been brought forward is truly representative of the people that are part of our neighborhood. Our reasons for asking for this are several, and I think through you, Mayor Murdoch, Councillor Zelka alluded to them, and that is our neighborhood has a unique and special character, one that's recognized both nationally and internationally for its park-like setting and the beauty of its design. You may not know it was designed by one of the most foremost landscape architects in North America, a guy by the last name of Olmsted, not the same Olmsted that designed Central Park in New York, but I think could have been his younger brother, his son. Okay, so, but nonetheless, this is an area with considerable stature in the world of urban planning and of landscape architecture. So it's unique and special, and we have all kinds of reasons to expect that it might be treated as the unique and special area that it is. Additionally, and not to get too focused on the pecuniary aspects of life in Uplands, we have a proportionally larger per capita contribution to the tax base of Oak Bay municipality. And the district, should it so choose, is at liberty to use those monies to address an affordable housing shortage, if that's a direction that you choose to take. But we believe it's short-sighted to say, okay, we're going to have duplexes and triplexes in uplands. We will be happy to work with staff to facilitate and coordinate efficient additional consultation. Happy to do that. We're sorry we're late to the party here. We got the 240-page report, as did all of you, Friday night. And so because this is new material to us, we did not have the horsepower to review it as extensively as staff has. So we're playing catch up here. But we sure know that we are not pleased with the statement on page 11 of the strategy that says uplands area will be included for infill. It's far too soon for a statement like that to show up in a document that is to be endorsed by this group tonight. So we ask that you please, I mean, you could endorse the document for all the other neighborhoods if that's your will, but please, we ask, out of respect for the stature of our neighborhood, that you hold off on using language like endorsement when it comes to uplands.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Palmer. And just for the records, and yeah, thank you for your comments. The at the end of the day, we managed from a. Can you turn off the microphone? It gets a little echoey when there's two. Thank you. You can have a seat, and Mr. Karin can come up. From a survey perspective, we work with the numbers that are there, and they're prepared as professionally and to those standards. So at the end of the day, we have to work with the actual numbers that are provided to us and the numbers that come back. So I appreciate that they may not resonate, and people may have said they didn't get information, but I will reiterate that every household in Oak Bay got a notification. We did everything we could in our power to kind of raise the awareness, and I know I probably shouldn't share the story. My wife will probably get mad at me, but I mean, our little card sat on the table for 3 days, and then she sort of asked the general question about, how come we're not doing anything on infill stuff? And I'm like, it's right there, if you look at it. So it's not uncommon for these things to go by, and hence the effort, and also hence why we're doing this iterative approach of consultation, so that as you respect, and I appreciate the comments here about specific to the uplands, those guidances will certainly guide the next phases of it. So thank you for that. Mr. Cochran.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to Council. Tonight you're being asked to endorse the infill housing strategies for Oak Bay. I, along with others, question the methodology, results, and analysis that has so far been presented in the 240-page report. Few people in Uplands seem aware of the study. One of the questions I would ask was the residency of the respondents verified, or could anyone claim Oak Bay residency? Because the statistics in the report do not correspond with any of the discussions we're having in Uplands. As mentioned, we have now formed the Uplands Neighborhood Association, and we would hope that that would be a means to facilitate communication so we are not similarly surprised in the future, because we do feel surprised. We believe a full and verifiable survey of all Uplands owners and residents is needed, and we seek the time to present same to Council, or in fact have the Council perform same. Uplands is an urban park. Uplands was entrusted to Council to protect under the Oak Bay Special Powers Act, 1935. The Act granted Oak Bay Municipal Council the legal right and responsibility to establish any additional regulations deemed indispensable for protecting the subdivision's overall residential park-like character. We're concerned for the character. Well, we, the owners and residents of Uplands, hope and in fact inspect Council to honor that special mandate to protect Uplands. We do it every day. We groom, maintain, and preserve the Uplands Urban Park at our expense to the benefit of all of Victoria's residents and visitors. We understand that the provincial government has asked each municipality to study densification, but not all municipalities or neighborhoods will have the same capacity to build additional housing. Oak Bay is landlocked and built out. The capacity to house more people, affordably or not, is limited in Oak Bay, especially when compared to municipalities adjacent who have vacant or annexable land and newer infrastructure. The Oak Bay infrastructure is in need of upgrading or replacement already. It is worth noting that as you increase entitlements to the land, the greater the land value. So if you want higher density, you will have higher value land. All across Oak Bay, it will be less affordable, not more affordable. There is plenty of land on Vancouver Island, including the Salish Peninsula, without the province attempting to force it into every neighborhood. Infill can happen selectively and sensitively where it makes sense. But some places need to be preserved for present and future generations. Once you break the egg, you can't put it back together. So we respectfully ask you to defer any decisions regarding infill and to not endorse, by way of the dictionary definition pointed out, tonight or any night, the infill strategy as presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just for terminology correctness, the ask is to endorse the guiding principles and the key directions, not a plan. I just want to make sure we're clear on that part, but thank you for those comments. We have two members online I see that have their hands raised. I have Mark Edwardson, and then following that I have Carrie Smart. If you could unmute yourself, and Mr. Edwardson, I'm assuming that's the correct name, is if you could just state your name, municipality of residence. If you can turn on your video, it pops you up to the top of the screen, but you don't have to turn on your video to address us. Thank you and welcome.
Yeah, good evening, Council. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
That's great. My name is Mark Edwardson. I live in Oak Bay at 1566 Yale Street, just across from Council, actually. I'm temporarily living in Calgary, but that is my permanent residence. I just want to say that overall, I do really support this report. It's clear that there's been a lot of consultation. I got 2 postcards myself and filled out the survey, and almost everyone I talked to did as well because I told them to do so. And I think the numbers in the survey showed there's been a lot of consultation and most people had a good chance to participate. As a sort of side note, I actually do sort of support new homes in uplands. I think that there's actually a lot of space there for new homes, and it would be just as pretty if it were like 2 or 3 times as dense. That's just a side note. I do want to comment that something I feel that has been missing from this conversation and from the report is any sort of analysis of actually how many homes we need to build and how far this report is going to go, or how far infill housing is going to go to achieve that goal. Oak Bay's 2020 Housing Needs Report says that we need close to 1,000 new homes by 2024. And I know that those reports typically underestimate the amount of new homes we need. It feels that a lot of this conversation has been sort of dominated by how much housing we're comfortable building, as opposed to how many homes we need to build for Oak Bay to still remain affordable and accessible to new generations. So it would be really good if there could be some analysis around the future, or if we could give that just a little bit more thought, that the goal here is not just to sort of preserve what we love and preserve our character and whatnot, all that great stuff, but also just like build enough homes that this can be an affordable and attainable place to live. I noted, like in the presentation, for instance, they were talking about how certain types of homes, townhouses and apartments, because they're quote unquote high impact, would likely have to go through a public hearing or rezoning bylaws, and those sort of extensive processes. And I think that if there was a sort of analysis on how that would impact how many homes we're building, you might come to a conclusion that would suggest that those types of homes do not need to be going through extensive public hearing processes. And yeah, we do need to build more homes. I think that should be the more of a guiding principle, that we need to build as many homes as possible. It should be relatively easy to do so. And going forward, I strongly support not having extensive approval processes and making it more like a development permit process where a builder can just apply for a permit to build a couple of townhouses wherever they want and get that through the door relatively quickly. So that's what I hope council can bear in mind, and hopefully we can get this through the door relatively quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Edwardson. I next have Carrie Smart. Welcome, Ms. Smart. If you just state your name and municipality of residence for the record, and then feel free to address council.
Hi, it's Carrie Smart, and I'm an Oak Bay resident. I am fully confident that council and staff will provide fulsome public consultation and sensitivity to the implementation going forward. I encourage council to endorse this document and to direct staff tonight to report back with an implementation plan, a plan that provides an early option for implementation of concrete, highly supported bylaw changes that would encourage the 150 units of housing per year, as outlined in our housing needs report. An early implementation option should address legalizing duplexes, adding garden suites, and removing the requirement to house a car. Every year we take to study infill housing, our housing crisis in Oak Bay gets worse. We cannot take 8 years to implement and study infill housing in our community. Housing needs is the #1 issue I hear at the doorstep canvassing. A lack of housing options for those who want to downsize from their single family home or provide options for multi-generational family living. Approximately 70% of residents are supportive of infill housing, and the majority of this community is looking for your leadership tonight to move forward this very early stage of this process and to ensure we meet the needs of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smart, for your input. There's no other people online who have indicated they wish to speak to council. I'll come back into the room if anybody else from the public wishes to talk to council. You're more than welcome to do so at this point. And if not, then we will come back to this table and have a discussion about the options in front of us. Is there anybody who wishes to address council before we move back to this table? Not seeing any. Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you for being here tonight. Back to this table. We have recommendations here. We have the report in front of us, and happy to go to, again, any further questions or to motions. Go ahead, Councillor Ne.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question through you to staff, and in light of the questions and some of the issues that were brought up by those who spoke at the mic here. I was kind of curious how it is, the two places where there was the highest discrepancy between what participants generally said and what those living in the community said was on both housing, on infill housing types and expanded housing types. In my quick assessment of this was at Harling Point and in the uplands. And given that conflict between larger community perception and those who are living in that neighborhood's perception of the kind of housing types they would want, I'm just curious what staff's suggestion, and particularly on the uplands, what their suggestion about how the plan would deal with those more hefty conflicts in those particular neighborhoods.
Mr. Bull, this comes right down to the heart of the consultation process and the difference between and what we're contemplating today and some of the more detailed pieces. So I think a little fulsome answer here would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I think there's a lot of information, particularly on those two neighborhoods, also Oak Bay Avenue, to consider for determining next steps. And as staff, we're going to look at that. Given the numbers we got in community responses, we think it definitely gives an important indication. So it would inform how we look at these housing types for the different neighborhoods. I think specifically to uplands, I think it's clear that options that require more substantial changes to existing sites are far less supported than others. Even some of the other options are not wholeheartedly supported or have a lot of concern. So that's something to look at. What are the implications of that? Are there options that can be considered for uplands? That needs to be reviewed by us as staff, and then we'll come back to you with advice on that. And then it's up to the next council to provide direction on those kind of next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just noticed we've had another person from the public who's indicated they wish to speak, and given our foibles of technology, I always hate to prevent people from speaking. So I have Leslie W. online who's raised their hand. If you could state your name, municipality of residence, you're welcome to address council before we get on to any deliberations. Go ahead.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me all right?
Hear you, yes.
Good, thank you. It's Leslie Watson calling in, and sorry, I couldn't find the raise hand function inside the meeting. I was desperately trying to do it. Anyway, I'm here now. Thank you. I just wanted to kind of reiterate what I heard Carrie Smart say about moving this forward. And I think that the framework's solid, and the presentation and the materials and the staff recommendations are really sound. Council is not committing themselves to anything by endorsing this tonight, except for a more detailed exploration of these options with more engagement with the public. And I heartily encourage you to make that endorsement tonight and move the process forward so that possibly in the next term of council, we actually can bring some housing change forward by introducing some of these options in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Watson. Back to this table. Anything else, Councillor Ne? You think you were done the things? Are there any other questions at this point? I don't think I have any other questions per se. I'm just looking at the comments that were made. If there's any sort of clarifying questions that might come of this. I guess perhaps I might ask one question of Mr. Bull. I know there's no plan yet in place in terms of what next, but there was a comment made by Mr. Cochran on this, just talking about seeking a chance to consult more broadly with the residents of Uplands and Ms. Palmer, President Palmer. Also, the president's name in 24, Kiefer Sutherland. Anyway, just asking about that that ability to consult. So I'm trying to get my head around moving things forward. If we move things forward, does that open the doors for that sort of more directed consultation, or are we better? Because we've had sort of the broadest sense of things, and I'm just trying to get a sense of where that consultation might happen most easily in terms of a going forward process.
Thank you, Your Worship. That consultation, there are definitely going to be consultation options for that. I think the first report that comes back will comment on the housing types and the type of processes staff think might be appropriate, but it will also outline consultation options. So by the time council looks at that that first follow-up report, at that time we're going to decide, or council needs to decide, what kind of engagement and consultation is needed for the next steps. And as part of that, we could well consider what kind of consultation specifically to neighborhoods might be appropriate or relevant or necessary, and we can definitely follow up on that at that time.
And just for clarification again, for those sitting at home, it's very difficult for council to initiate consultation on anything unless there's actually a project at least a potential project in the works. We don't typically consult on things that there hasn't been given some indication that there's some interest from council. So that's part of the catch-22 we're going to be facing here on this one is how do we get to that more directed consultation if we eliminate options at this point. Go ahead, Councillor Green, and then Councillor Appleton.
Thank you very much to Mr. Bowl and his department, and to the consultants. Thanks to the public who have spoken tonight. Really appreciate it. And congratulations to the Uplands for finally organizing a neighborhood association. I have wondered about that for years, and I think this is an important step because I think it will give you the vehicle you need for better and more focused consultation. So that's great. And I think it's important that endorsement, we're endorsing not construction, not plans to change neighborhoods. What we're doing is endorsing principles around better housing and more housing options in Oak Bay. I think that's really important. This is a pretty comprehensive report, and I participated in a lot of the activities around survey collection and so on. Oh, you don't want comments?
I think I'd prefer if we had a motion on the floor to talk to, so that we are not just sort of having generalized comments. So if you're willing to make first, we can maybe just have a motion to receive, and then we can just go into more broader conversation.
So I think we have a motion to receive. I'll second
Moved
that.
and seconded. Thank you. Thank you. So go ahead.
Okay, I won't be long-winded, I promise. Although it's our last meeting, it's a chance to kick the cat a number of times. But I'm impressed with this comprehensive report, and as many of us did, participated in the activities along with the consultants and with the public. And I was heartened by the public's attitude about looking at housing options for Oak Bay. I do agree the Uplands is a special area. It is protected by a 1935 piece of legislation. And I hope one of the things that the new association will tackle, neighborhood association, are so many of the demolitions, because that is also changing the face of the Uplands. And there are some very important character homes that have disappeared. In fact, one of them, hopefully not, but my grandparents' home sold recently, and I'm very concerned about it. So I hope that they were there many, many years ago, not recently, but I really hope that people don't get concerned about the fact that I think this is one of the most important reports that we've done in Oak Bay around housing options and housing generally. But I would hope that people would understand that one of the goals of council is to ensure that we consult properly. And so neighborhood associations make that possible as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just wanted to respond to some of the points that were raised by the members of the public that spoke. And I too recognize, the concern around maintaining the specific character of Uplands. Undeniably a very a unique area and very important to the community. I just wanted to clarify. It is a question to staff, although I kind of know the answer, but I just so that these folks can hear the answer to that. I just wanted to confirm that Uplands was included as part of the infill discussion primarily by virtue of the fact that it is a residential zoning. It is a different type of residential zoning, but it's encompassed in the residential zoning. So it was the direction of council for infill to be considered on all single-family residential lots. So with the understanding that not every neighborhood would be considered equal, but just that was the definition. So that's a question, but I know the answer to that. And then secondly, just with respect to the specific comment about Uplands area to be included in infill, which is on page 11 of the report, I would just clarify that is under the comments from an advisory body to council. So that is coming from and that is advice for council to consider, just as the advice that you are providing tonight is advice for council to consider. So that statement being included in there does not in and of itself constitute a direction of council. That's just information that should be taken under advisement by council moving forward. So.
All right, Mr. Bull, you want to comment on the first part of the question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think that's an accurate description. One of the single-family neighborhoods that we are looking at, but all options are still on the table. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. And yeah, I would just reiterate what Councillor Appleton has said, but I think would think it would be a good time to put a motion on the table, if you're willing.
We have a motion to receive right now. I'm happy to.
I thought we took the vote on that already. Sorry.
No, we haven't.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Allowing you to a general discussion, recognizing that we have a couple of things coming forward as recommendations, but they may change based on the conversation we're going to have. So I'll take if there's any other discussion on the motion to receive. We'll take general comments. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just talking with folks about this particular report that came up, and yes, it's a very large report and not a lot of time to read it, although some of the earlier reports kind of alluded to where we were kind of getting at. So I appreciate the fact that there really aren't that many surprises in here. Although what has been a surprise for certainly many people I'm speaking to is the fact that that the entire Oak Bay is being treated as one unit, and all neighborhoods appear to be, from the principal's perspective, being suggested to be treated the same. And I have heard some say recently that while secondary suites was relatively straightforward since we stay within the footprint, infill is a huge change. It is quite a different animal. than secondary suites, as it involves much more site coverage, and will no doubt be affecting a lot of tree removal, unfortunately. So with that in mind, I'm pleased that we have this data to work with, but I'm also very, very cognizant that this will potentially bring in quite a large amount of change. I appreciate the fact that one of the principles is maintain the cherish and maintain what we love, but how? If we're going to be basically creating additional buildings and tearing down the trees and bringing in, of course, the resulting cars and bikes and everything else that will be needed to support that. So this is a rock and a hard place, and which is why I think this is a monumental change for Oak Bay, and I'd like to move slowly on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Councillor Ne.
It's, yeah, I thank you to staff for this remarkable piece of work, both in the engagement and the compilation of all the data and presentation of the report and whatnot. So, and I agree with others at the table. This is a real watershed moment or a watershed report for this community moving forward. I feel really confident with what we've done so far and the information in this report, because it provides the opportunity for us to decide how to roll out an infill strategy in a nuanced way if we want, because the data is there for us to consider and to inform the plan going forward. And so I think this is a very good beginning. I look forward to what staff will bring back based on this data. I really appreciate the comments coming, especially up from Uplands. It is unique in many ways and probably needs some particular consideration. I think the way the data is laid out here, it gives us that opportunity to create an infill throughout the community, not with one cookie cutter approach, but in a nuanced way, so that we can retain, you know, the character of this community that we also love. So, thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. And it's been very enlightening to listen to all of the comments tonight. Very good comments that we've received. I also consider that change is inevitable. When I looked at the last census data for the district of Oak Bay, it did say that that there were about 6,500 homes built between 1960 and 1980. So change is somewhat inevitable. It also said that 445 were reported as needing major repairs. So they're not related to any one district within the community. They are throughout the community, and change will be inevitable in many of those lots. So how we manage it and how we plan for it going forward, I think, will define what the community is going to be in the future. Hopefully we will be able to maintain much of the character that we all love in the district, but the change is inevitable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I'll just make a couple of comments on as well. You know, I think this whole piece started off very early in the council term, just recognizing that what the housing needs report emphasized, but we knew it already, that there's housing forms in Oak Bay that don't exist and would be beneficial. So ability and the housing needs, the presentation talked about it a little bit, but some of those are just allowing people to live within their neighborhoods and move laterally as their needs change. So as children leave, being able to move into a smaller unit, as families grow to be able to find larger places. So looking for some lower maintenance options, some larger options. And so this has been a pretty broad approach taken so far. We've sort of painted, you know, all the options and all the areas to kind of understanding. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that so many people did respond to give us some indication. I will emphasize public input and surveys don't dictate what gets done. So it's not that anything says, oh, this has 60% support and this has 40% support, so the 60% gets rubber stamped and the 40% doesn't get a look. It's to give some guidance, right, to capture the option in front of us and to make sure that we're aware of the pros and the cons and the general feeling. And so that whatever decisions get made can be done in the wisest way possible of addressing those concerns. I also just want to acknowledge that that change, I think we all recognize how special this place is. It is a jewel. We've all moved here because we love it, and we recognize that special nature of it. So this isn't to say it's all wrong, so we have to fix it. It's to say, you know, we have to steward change over time, and we have to do it carefully. And I look at this as a way of an incremental way of allowing us to do some planning so that things aren't just happening ad hoc, which is what's happening right now or not happening right now. And so hopefully this will give some guidance to allow for the housing forms that we actually need to be built and allow for those changes to happen with instead of a one-off reaction, to look at the broader context about how those changes might be done. So that's the principle. And I think we heard here tonight, we've heard both sort of pause things and go faster, and but also I think very loudly that the neighborhood characters that we're going to be addressing have to be really dealt with. And I think specifically to the uplands, those pieces, I think it's an education piece in terms of making sure the residents of the uplands and other places are aware of those special characteristics. But it doesn't automatically mean that there isn't any changes allowed either. I think, to my mind, we have to look at this more holistically. And the way we do that is to move this forward largely as it's laid out here, because it allows for us then to say have those sort of more specific targeted consultations in the neighborhoods that we might consider changes in. So those are my thoughts. I think that's probably more than people want to listen to. But I do really appreciate the thoughtful comments that have been made on all sides of the spectrum so far. And I anticipate as we go forward, boy, there will be a lot more consultation and voices heard at the table as we go through things. Councillor Green?
Just one final comment. I think I'm hoping that new housing coming into Oak Bay will be a unifying experience, not a divisive experience. And there are also some checkpoints along the way. We have very, very good committees and commissions that do land use, the Heritage Commission, the Advisory Planning Commission, and the Advisory Design Panel. Those are all volunteers, many of whom live in and work in Oak Bay, and so we have those checks and balances. So that's just one piece of the consultation, but I do hope at the end of the day it will be a positive experience for neighborhoods and individuals, keeping in mind that everyone cares a lot about the future of this community. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion to receive. I think we can probably call the question on the motion to receive at this point. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Any other motions? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Your Worship, I would make the motion that Council endorse the document Infill Housing Strategy Options for Oak Bay.
This is the one that contains the guiding principles and key directions. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion or comment you want to make? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. The principles and directions, when broken out, the word endorse, I have a bit of a hard time with because we are literally launching that ship, and we are making some decisions with this meeting, I'm sorry to say. As is, I can't support the motion, but I would like to propose an amendment that would get me to the point where I could support it.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So the amendment I would say is that at the end of the motion, dated September 2022, treating the Uplands and Harling Point neighborhoods for a much lighter infill approach. In other words, the endorsement, or let's see if there's a second, for an approach to treat the Uplands and Harling Point neighborhoods for a much lighter infill approach.
Giving the table a chance, if they wish to second, to think about it, but not seeing any uptake on that. Councillor Zelka. Oh, Councillor Patterson, you wish to second?
I'll second it for discussion because I would like to hear the comments.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. The report uses the word all a number of times in terms of basically with the key directions and the guiding principles being applied to all neighborhoods, and it implies equally, and I cannot endorse that. The Uplands neighborhoods themselves, as shown up in what was the aspects of the survey compared to the normatives, and the Harning Point surveys were also quite different with respect to the normatives. I would definitely like to see those two neighborhoods in particular treated uniquely, and that's why I refer to a much lighter infill approach with respect to what might be applied with respect to the applications of the directions and the principles elsewhere. That's the intention of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zalka. Might just turn to staff very briefly, Mr. Bull, and just ask. I'm not sure. It's different wording than we usually use in planning things, so a later touch. So, I guess from your point of view, what does that imply, or is that an unfair question to ask at this point? I'll give you a minute to consider. It's okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. Although I do think the results from the community survey give some ideas for that kind of an approach. I think very clearly. So I think it's something that we fully intend to follow up on in terms of we see that there's differences and in fit and preferences. So we fully intend as staff to take that in very serious consideration. So yeah, in that context, I would look at this direction if council decides to give that specific direction to us.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I seconded this for discussion. I do have trouble supporting it, though, and my rationale for that is that the report says that this is about the key directions, and I think that limiting discussion on those key directions for any reason, in fact, defeats some of the purpose of going forward with this. I think that it is worthwhile to put the full slate of key directions forward by all parts of the community so that they can have fulsome discussion. They may agree or disagree with those key directions, and I think in listening to Mr. Bull earlier tonight, I'm still looking for things like sustainability and things like how it will fit with climate mitigation, water runoff, all of those types of things. So, but I think we need to just at least embrace the key directions at this point and then ask the questions about those key directions. So unfortunately, I won't be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just picking up on that thought, I also would not support the amendment as it's currently presented. And in a similar mode of thought, I see it as not wanting to unduly constrain any conversation that we might have with the community. I think the community is asking us to look at the broad principles of how we're moving forward. They've provided us some really good information in this report, and I think that at this stage of the game, I'm not prepared to get behind an approach that starts to drill down to the details of how we might deal with individual neighborhoods. I think what people are telling us is they want to have a neighborhood by neighborhood conversation about what they feel is appropriate, what might fit there, and I don't want to unduly constrain that conversation at this point. Thank you, Worship.
I'm just going to ask, is anybody going to speak in favor of this? Because if not, I might just call the question. Not seeing any, so I think I'm ready to call the question unless there's any other comments people wish to make. I'm happy to go ahead. Nope, I'll just call the question. There's a motion on the amendment to change that piece, and all those in favor and those opposed, Councillor Green, Braithwaite, Appleton, Patterson, Ney, and Murdoch opposed. That motion to amend fails. So we're back to the main motion in front of us. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
If I may continue, I much appreciate that. So I'd just like to clarify, what are the objectives of the infill? I just wanted to be absolutely clear, because I've heard some people in the public say it's to maybe have less expensive housing. But I also heard members of the public say higher density brings a higher value land, which actually raises the price and does the exact opposite of what many people think it might do. And any real estate agent might agree with them. So I just want to confirm, what are the objectives? And I asked this question because the same thing kind of came up with secondary suites. People thought secondary suites was going to somehow bring a lower rentals. But unfortunately, it creates a higher and best use and creates a higher priced house, which may actually create a higher rental. But I don't want to get into secondary suites. I just want to confirm for objectives of infill, please, if I may.
believe those are the guiding principles that we've agreed to here, but Mr. Bull, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Indeed, those guiding principles have been identified earlier in the process, and I wasn't here along for the full process, but it's clearly focused on a diversity of housing options. That's really the key objective here, as far as if I interpret correctly.
Mr. Zelka?
So the objectives are the guiding principles. They're one and the same. So that's what I'm hearing you say. So it is not less expensive housing. Just want to be absolutely clear about this.
Individual motivations are separate. I think the guiding principles of our policies here is laid out here. So yeah, I think that is with different housing forms, there are potentially less expensive and more expensive house options that'll come, but that is not one of the three primary guiding principles.
The last point I'd like to make is that the City of Toronto provided an absolutely wonderful example for us to consider in this discussion with respect to the idea that more housing will bring a lower cost. In the City of Toronto, in the last two census tracts, the number of private dwellings increased by 7%, but in the last two censuses, the population of Toronto only grew by 4.6%, and yet the cost of housing increased 56 or 52% above the average. So even though there was way more housing being built and not as many people moving into Toronto, the cost of housing still went up. So I just wanted to show that we actually have a Canadian example. We don't have to look to other countries where build it and they will come and the price will come down does not apply. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Green?
Yes, thank you. I think the housing market at the moment is hugely speculative in terms of its future and where it's going. I think the important thing is that we've been talking about a housing plan for 4 years. I believe, Mayor, it was in your platform 4 years ago, and I think we've been making slow but steady progress on a housing plan, and planning implies consultation. We have been incredibly careful. I believe as a council we have employed good consultants. We, unfortunately, with COVID, we were unable to consult the way I would like to consult, that is neighborhood to neighborhood, and that is still part of the plan ahead. The most effective meetings are neighborhood meetings, and as I said earlier, the most effective means of reaching neighborhoods is through neighborhood organizations and associations. So I think this council has been incredibly responsible with our approaches to housing and housing planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I'm just going to turn to staff before I go to the next speakers. I just want to make sure I'm clear on what I took the motion as the recommendation here to endorse. There's another part of that. So it's secondary to the report back. So I'll just deal with that one separately after we deal with this primary motion. Thanks. Sorry, Councillor. Sorry, it's the new Green. Councillor Green, go ahead. Councillor Patterson. And then
Thank you, Mayor. And going back to the comments by Councillor Zelka, I just also wanted to bring forward that I did have circulated a motion arising from some of this discussion that I will bring forward at the end of this discussion, and I think it may address in a lot of the issues that Councillor Zelka raised in a way that we can deal with it. Thank you.
we have just a half hour left in our scheduled meeting, so I'm going to try and get through this pieces then, and maybe we can get to some of the other pieces. The main motion on the floor right now is as recommended for endorsement of the principles and general directions. So any other discussion? I don't see. I think we had most of our motivations in the last motion. So all those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Zelka opposed. And there's one more recommended motion here. Councillor Appleton.
Your Worship, I would make the second recommendation that Council direct staff to report back with an implementation plan for the infill housing strategy.
Second.
Thank you. And the full text that's there, I'm assuming is the intention. Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on that piece? I'm not seeing any. I will call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Councillor Patterson, you indicate you had a motion arising.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mayor, and council members for considering this. We did just, and I'm very pleased that we passed secondary suites, and we are now moving forward with this. And of course, there is a duty on the part of council to actually be accountable for the intent of it. And I will go back to where we started originally, which was with a housing framework that then we split into individual pieces. But the motion that I have provided says, whereas the housing framework provides direction on how Oak Bay can achieve greater housing supply, affordability, and diversity, and accommodate community housing needs that reflect Oak Bay's character now and into the future. And whereas the housing framework aims to support a healthy and safe living environment for Oak Bay residents, be it therefore resolved that Council directs staff to report back on options and implications of monitoring the district's housing framework to meet objectives and to report annually on the progress.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Councillor Patterson, you've done whereases to help motivate. If there's anything else you wish to add, feel free.
Yes, I think that rather than keeping these separated, we should try and get back to the housing framework and agree on principles by which we will evaluate what progress we are making. This is something that all communities that are going through this process need to report on. It will also allow us to report on regional growth strategies through the CRD. My thought process would be that we could take some of the Canada Census data for the District of Oak Bay, incorporate that into a framework table that we would agree upon. It could then be reported on annually with our annual report without having to produce another publication, and perhaps each 4 years when the new census data comes out, either council could request or staff could recommend a more in-depth report basis what we believe we have achieved and what is reported in the census data. Thank you.
Thank you. So looking at what we did, and for those who don't know, we've moved our annual reports to actually include standardized metrics so that we can actually track important data over time. So the intention of this is to essentially request that some of these housing metrics be developed, and that'll come back to council for what those would actually look like. Okay, thank you for that clarification and allowing me to indulge in that extra question. Go ahead, Councillor Selka.
Thank you so much, and motivating for approval of this. I do note that, as mentioned in the report, the infill housing strategy is part of the overarching housing framework. I just wanted to clarify, maybe with the mover, it talks about objectives. These are probably not the same objectives as the infill. Which objectives is being suggested to be reported out on? Thank you.
These were the ones that were contained originally in the housing framework, but because of timing differences, we started splitting it. We moved forward with the secondary suites to expedite that process, which we all supported. But rather than have it fractured, I would like to bring it back to these key principles that were articulated by council in the strategic plan for the housing framework.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and certainly support in principle and appreciate Councillor Patterson bringing this one forward. I guess I would just put it through you. I would place a comment to staff. I'm going to assume that a lot of the data that would underpin this type of reporting is material that staff will probably have on hand in any case, and so it's not going to represent a significant workload implication as far as the annual reporting process. I think this is just a matter of, and I'm paraphrasing Councillor Patterson, but essentially compiling and organizing that information into a single location so that we can track progress. And is that reasonable, Mr. Bull?
Mr. Bull, and I do know this doesn't dictate what. It just asks staff to come back with some recommendations on that. But Mr. Bull?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. There's certainly a number of data sources, including census, but also our own permitting data, for example, that would be considered as part of a report back. So, and there may be other data that we could make available, but that's all part then of our follow-up back to council to seek your direction.
Thank you for that. Any other discussion? No? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Very briefly, I will also support the motion. I think it's always useful to have more information rather than less. So, thank you.
Thank you. I notice our report on housing in our annual report is pretty static for the most part. So there you go. So I think having and understanding the impacts of policy is always the key part of that document. I don't see any other speakers, so I'm happy to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you for that. Anything else arising on that item tonight? Not seeing any, so I will go to next new business. I think there's any indication of new business tonight. If you wish to leave, if you don't want to stick around for our final couple of items, you're more than welcome to do so. You won't disrupt anything if you want to go out. You can go out either door, the back door or the side door. Either way, you're welcome to stay though. I know those seats are very comfortable. Thank you. They're terrible chairs. Yes. Moving on to item number 11. 11. New business. I've done new business. Yeah. So notice of motion. I'm just going to split this into two pieces, if you're okay, because I think there's a policy question here and then a more specific personal one. And I'd like you to stick around for the policy one, if that's all right. So the first piece here was to ask. Sorry, Councillor Ne, do you want to read that portion? This is your notice of motion.
That council directs staff to bring forward policy options for a council policy and budget to fund conflict of interest costs incurred by members of council during the discharge of their duty.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Thank you. Councillor Ne, do you want to motivate? And I might just throw in a little 2 cents on this one to maybe speed things up a little bit as well. I think if you can maybe motivate on the merits of this, it may be worthwhile to refer this to strategic planning so that the impact of the cost and so forth would come back. But even if this passes, it'll come back with a policy report on the impact. So either way would work. So go ahead, Councillor Ne. No, there's one of two options, I think, on this one. The motion as it stands, if it passes, would bring back a staff report on impacts, or it could be if the will of council was also to refer to strategic planning, to consider it as part of the overall pieces, but I'll leave that to your pieces as well.
No, this issue came up when we were dealing with the Oak Bay Lodge decision, and I was in a conflict and wasn't sure what to do, and I was advised to get some legal consult, and without a policy, we don't have any parameters or constraints around it, and I know other councils typically do. It was kind of open-ended, and I think that if we did have a policy, it helps guide councillors about when to consult, how to consult, and also how to negotiate a consult with a lawyer, so that I think you'll see that so I think that's what that would add, a policy.
Thanks, Councillor Ne. And seconder, any? Just go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I am familiar with many municipalities that do have a policy around this. Typically, though, it is for basically covers a 1 hour consultation with legal counsel. Either for consideration of the matter at hand or for a request for fees to consider the matter at hand. So that was more my thought process along for the policy, and however, I'm sure staff will come back with something. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to get into deciding what our policy should be here. It's really just a question of whether or not this is seen to be important enough to send off to staff to get that piece. Go ahead, Councillor Zalka.
Thank you so much. I'm generally in favor of this. I'm definitely looking forward to hearing what the policy options are, and possibly this could include maybe a brief survey of what the other local authorities in the area at least do. I don't know what they do in this area, so I'm quite curious. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the request for a staff report back on policy? I do have that right. If this passes, staff will come back with sort of costs and sort of, because I know that you can make a fulsome policy, you can make a narrow policy, et cetera. So the direction of that would come back. I just want to make sure that we're clear in terms of what we're actually discussing here. Go ahead, Mr. Coates.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I think just for clarity's sake, then essentially this would come back in a bit of a mini new initiative assessment report. So you could sort of get a sense of the simple policy to the more complex policy and what the sort of range of potential impacts of that might be. But I think generally speaking, there is a lot of information around, and it's in either sense, it's not anticipated to be a substantial body of work, although, with the policy options, identified in a new assessment or a new initiative impact assessment, council could sort of pick and choose how complicated or how interested in numbers of different issues that you'd be.
Sure, thank you. More complicated, more expensive. There we go. Got it. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. And just going on what Councillor Patterson was saying about other jurisdictions, we would be looking at other jurisdictions to see what their policies were to help guide us.
Your Worship, through you, yes, and reinventing the wheel isn't necessary on this one at all. Yeah.
Thank you. So, go ahead, Councillor Green.
Just very quickly, I think this situation is challenging and difficult when you don't have policy in place, and I think this is a good example of why we need guidelines and policy. It's a difficult and challenging area anyway, but anything we can provide in the way of policy, a policy framework is important.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Don't see other discussion on this. I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That will come back to the next council, obviously, in terms of its pieces. It may, in fact, line up with the strategic planning process anyway as part of the initiatives. And then, Councillor Ne, you want to
I'll recuse myself because the monetary issue has
okay, thank you.
Affects me personally.
Thank you. This is like a recursive algorithm where I'm having a conflict of interest declaration on a conflict of interest, ask on a conflict of interest, yes. All right, thank you. If you could just, I guess we can't really close the door, can we? We'll just go with that. I think we're broadcasting out there anyway, so it's probably a little bit of a piece if there's a space that we can go to. So next, there's an ask here for authorization of reimbursement of legal fees. Well, Councillor Ney is not here to move it, so I might ask if there is a, I mean, if there's not a mover and a seconder, then it fails on the face of it, but we have a notice of motion here in front of us. I would probably appreciate somebody making the motion, and if there's no seconder, then that would end it. But if
I'll make the motion. Thank you very much.
Moved, and is there you want to make the motion as it's laid out here?
Yes, as indicated in the agenda.
Okay. Is there any seconder for this motion? Moved and seconded. Thank you.
Second it for discussion.
Okay, so it's on the floor. I put you on the spot to move it, so you feel free to motivate if you wish.
It would be from those that I know who have had dealt with this issue. If they were no longer on council, that probably meant they lost. But Tara, our Councillor Ne is still on. So most likely, whatever this issue was, it was probably without merit, only because she's still here. And that may be part of a policy. So I definitely want to support a councillor colleague. I have no idea what it's about, and if staff does know about, and if it's relevant, by all means share what you can. Thank you.
I don't think so the question was simply Councillor Ne asked for a legal opinion on a potential conflict of interest, and sought a legal opinion, but we don't have a compensation policy. There's no policy in our books that says you get paid back, and I believe that was the advice given. But so this is kind of an after the fact ask if council would cover the costs for that conflict of interest piece. I think she mentioned it was related to her proximity to the Bowker and the Oak Bay Lodge redevelopment. But that's not terribly relevant. What's really relevant here is the ask for the monetary amount. And this is an awkward one I appreciate for everybody with a council colleague. So it's anything else, Councillor?
No, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Patterson and Councillor Appleton.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a question for staff. If the matter arises where a councillor would want to consider something like this, and was to make the request to council, would this be considered a discussion for an in-camera or a public meeting?
Mr. Coates?
Your Worship, through you, so it would be a public consideration.
Man, we sure are in the public eye, aren't we? Councillor Appleton?
No, thank you, Your Worship. Seeing as how it's on the table for discussion, I can't support it as it's currently presented. It's pretty cut and dried for me. I think council has indicated their support in having a policy to direct what might happen in these situations. In the absence of such a policy, I don't think I can support a one-off payment, especially seeing as I don't know the details of what the nature of the advice provided was or any of the details around where that number is coming from. So I'm wholly in support of a policy, but in the absence of the policy, I can't support this one-time ask.
Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. I feel pretty similar to Councillor Appleton, very supportive of looking at a policy, but to do something retroactively, I'm not sure if I can, I know I can't support that. I think we all deal with the conflict of interest, and we all deal with it. We've all had to deal with it over the 4 years. I know that for myself personally, if it's my daughter or my son that lives close to the proximity of something that might be coming up towards council, I would probably recuse myself. Same with if something was across the street from me, I would probably recuse myself without having to go and seek legal advice on that. So it's difficult for me to support paying retroactively for this, but I'm very willing to support looking for a process that we can move forward on this for, and looking at other jurisdictions to see what they do. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I might go ahead, Councillor Green.
This is an awkward one. I mean, it's very difficult, and I have dreaded. I've dreaded the item all day. I also feel that it is a difficult question, but I will support the first recommendation, of course, for policy, because I think that's why we're in this little mess. We don't have policy on the books, and I think, again, as I said, it really implores us to do something about this. Other municipalities do, in fact, have limits and caps and so on. So I cannot support the request retroactively, with regret. I'm sorry that I cannot, but I don't think it's come to us in a very difficult way. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll acknowledge it's come to us in a difficult way, and I think the policy will help. I'm going to throw out there as a possible piece of this, because I did a little bit of research, and Mr. Coates, you can confirm on this one, I think. But there is a very fulsome policy at the City of Victoria. I had a look at that. It caps the amount payable to any one councillor and any one request at $500. I thought that would, given that it's at least a pure policy that gives some framework, if we're looking at establishing a policy, it might not be unreasonable. I'm not a fan of retroactive application, but I also, if that would be probably my threshold of rationale would be to consider at least looking to a parallel body for a number if we wanted to look at a number at all. Sorry, and Councillor Patterson, you had your hand up, and then Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Mayor. I also will not be able to support this. I do support having a policy for it, because I think on many council decisions, having the full complement of voices at the council table, offering opinions and actually voting on matters is important to how we govern. But to do something like this retroactively is not, in my opinion, at least the best way to go about it. So support the policy, but I can't support authorizing reimbursement in this case.
So Zelka, you're the mover.
Thank you. I'd like to move an amendment. Now that I'm aware of a policy in a nearby local authority that suggests $500 maximum one time, I'd like to move that the amount be changed to $500 in the same wording of the motion. Thank you very much.
Is there a motion to second that? I don't see a motion to support it, so we will stick with the original request. For this, is there any other discussion on the matter? I think we've had a pretty fulsome discussion, but I'm happy to hear any other thoughts. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I think it would be fair to point out that I think all of us in the situation where we haven't had any guidance or policy, it would be difficult to make the assessments about what to do. So with all due respect to Councillor Ne, I think this wasn't something I'm sure that she did lightly and without real thought. So I hope this doesn't cast a shadow on her, because I think that would be undeserved. Thank you.
I think if anything, we want to encourage people to make sure that they're doing due diligence and erring on the side of caution when it comes to conflict of interest. I do note that obviously there's a perception as much as the reality of conflict of interest that is super important for the reputation of the organization. So I think we should always be striving to uphold the high standards, and that's not the question here at all. Councillor Ne has demonstrated anything on that front. This is just a monetary piece. Okay, well, I don't see any other discussion. I'm ready to call the question then. All those in favor? And those opposed? All members opposed? That fails. No other motions arising. Well, Mr. Coates, can you come back in? Yep, Mr. Ne back in. Thanks, Councillor Ne. We have Councillor Zelka, you have a notice of motion that was put forward last time. Now, this has been changed. Is it possible to throw the revised wording up on the screen? So that would just to simplify our conversation. We have nominally 10 minutes left in this meeting, and I don't think any of us want to stay a super long time past this point. And we do have to go back into in-camera to deal with a couple of other items before we go home for the night.
Very subtle, small changes, and I hope you move fast.
You can read it out while they're getting it up on screen.
Thank you very much. The general wording is rather similar, but what I found out in the last week relating to...
Perhaps you can just
read the motion? All right. Whereas...
No whereas, it's just the motion. I think it's fine.
Okay. Well, actually, the whereas is here, and the first one is wrong because it talks about... So I had to actually read the correction to the first whereas.
Okay, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you.
It's essentially, how about you move it? If there's a seconder, we'll go to. I'll treat the whereas as motivation.
All right.
I'll let you have the floor.
Thank you. So I'll go straight to the motion, and then if it's seconded, then I can use the whereases. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Excellent. Respectfully requests the Young Exceptional Star Yes Awards Ad Hoc Committee to find a way to allow all students associated with Oak Bay be eligible for nomination to the Yes Awards. And if I may say, the title of the motion is Removing Candidate Barriers.
Yeah, thank you for that. Councillor, I think that's remain the same.
Yes.
Council, is there a seconder for that motion? Go ahead. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka. You may read. We have the original whereases, so perhaps if you wish to highlight changes if you wish, or just you can motivate
Excellent.
more.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. The first motion basically is now in the past tense. As of this year, the Yes Award, I've been told by staff, is now an ad hoc committee because Mayor did not appoint and Council did not endorse or did not confirm what's the word for it? The appointment of committee members. So at this point, it's an ad hoc committee according to staff. So the intention of this, as I've learned through AVICC and UBCM, there's quite a number of motions out there in other local authorities to remove barriers to attracting a diversity of candidates to local government participation. So there's a lot of suggestions, for example, parental leave for elected officials. And the intention of this is to ask respectfully of this ad hoc committee, which now has some distance from Oak Bay Council and is not directed by Oak Bay Council directly, specifically, that the committee find a way to allow all students associated. Because currently there's an unwritten policy that children of Oak Bay senior staff, counselors, and presumably senior volunteers are not eligible. The idea is to avoid a potential perception of bias or favoritism. However, we all know that each of us around the council table, each of us local authorities, members, are personally responsible for our own conflict of interest and perceived conflict of interest. And we're held to account for that. The last point I'd like to make, if I may, is that the Township of the Esquimalt, for their awards that are for the children in the Township of the Esquimalt, everyone, including councillors, the children of councillors, are eligible. So if they can do it, I think we can too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Anybody wish, Councillor Patterson, did you wish to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think that this is not an unwarranted request, and I would like to encourage the ad hoc committee to actually come up with a policy that will address this in a way that is reasonable. It doesn't prevent any barriers, particularly to the youth. It's a highly acclaimed award process, and it would be wonderful if we could make sure that it accommodates all students who may be put forward in the manner that it is by their schools, and remove any barriers, and preserve the integrity of the ad hoc committee in making the awards. Thank you.
This is a bit odd one because we're sort of making a request of an external piece that isn't part of our thing. So, Councillor Braithwaite, this was your brainchild, and given that the nominations are coming up in January, perhaps you can give a little pitch as well if anybody's watching what's coming up, and just to give a little, just talk a little bit about the nature of these. And
Sure. Thanks very much for the for the opportunity. I have to apologize. I have a little frog in my throat. So normally, yes, we do start the nomination process in January and then hold the ceremony anytime from March to May. We've only ever had one conflict come up as to what Councillor Zelka was speaking of. But the nominations basically come from the teachers, the school counselors, the coaches, and as well as other people from the community. The awards have been in existence for 15 years. We've had 167 students receive awards, and from grade 6 to grade 12 that have received awards. The awards aren't based, as it says in here, in this motion, on academics. They were specifically designed, as a matter of fact, to celebrate the diversity of the students in many different areas of achievements, like arts, academics, community service, citizenship, athletics, and one of the most important areas to me was the overcoming obstacles. So I don't feel that they're restrictive at all in that respect. Every year these awards were put on to celebrate the many outstanding people that we have who live or go to school in our community, and we applaud those achievements that they have, and I think they've been really successful. They've become so meaningful to those kids. I have people who received an award in the very first year who come back to me now as adults, because that's what they are now, as young adults, and they say what an impact this award had, even though there's no monetary thing associated with it or anything like that. It's just a little certificate and a little trophy, and it's just it's been a pleasure to be involved in these awards, and I hope they can move forward and continue, and I hope that that they're not impeded in any way.
Anybody else have any comments on this? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Just a question. Why is the committee ad hoc? Sorry, I didn't quite understand the nuances around the ad hocness of the committee.
Sure, I might go to Councillor Braithwaite. This started off as a, I'll ask Dr. Braithwaite, and then if there's anybody, she's been around for doing it for 15 years, so she may have the history a little bit better on this one. I'll go to staff in terms of what that looks like from an ad hoc committee perspective. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. So originally, when I came up with the idea for the awards, I was sitting on the Oak Bay Child and Youth Committee, and so I had people from that committee that were members of the community helping with the awards, and then it kind of morphed into having the youth coordinator from Oak Bay Parks and Rec step in to help a little bit with the awards as well. So that's kind of how that came about. And then now, we've basically taken a step back and said, these awards, if we want them to continue into perpetuity, because, the driving force has been often me behind them, that maybe we need to make it an ad hoc committee so that it can then continue if I'm not on council or something. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Anything staff want to add to that? I mean, ad hoc committees are sort of they're not just sort of as they sound, but Mr. Coates?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I think I'm wishing I used a different term when I was thinking about this, but with all due respect to all of the issues around that, what I really mean is it's not structured by the district. It's not something that council has created or the mayor has created under any authority of the local government act or the community charter, and so it doesn't kind of belong to an organization, and so it's really it's a grassroots community-based award situation that council up until this year appointed 2 liaisons to, who worked with and Councillor Braithwaite was one of them, worked with staff in parks to sort of pull together the information, and I understand, as Councillor Braithwaite indicated, that the submissions came largely from the schools, if that's the case, but it really doesn't belong to any organization, and that's the intent of what I'm using the term ad hoc to apply to.
Yeah, I do recognize that this is, I was going to rule this out of order in the original framework because of that. I'm looking at the time. I need a motion to extend the meeting beyond 9 o'clock. Moved and seconded. For how long, Councillor Zolka? 15 minutes? 15, 20 minutes? Councillor Green?
I just have a quick question. Would it be appropriate to roll the committee in under the arts and culture?
We have a motion to extend the meeting.
Oh, sorry. A motion to extend for 15?
Yeah, that's the motion on the floor. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, that carries forward. We have 15 minutes to finish us off. I'm inclined to not have us do that in this time frame. Anything else, Councillor Green?
No. No, thank you.
Great, thank you. I guess I will just, I'm not in support of the motion as it's in front of us here. I think, I think council, as I was actually we spoke to earlier, I think there's an obligation to always be held to a point where there's absolutely zero potential for anybody looking at the way we behave and if that would be perceived as a conflict of interest. And I'm just picturing a situation whereby there was a student nominated and the Oak Bay Yes Awards was given out to, and if it changes and it becomes an arm's length society and those pieces with less perception of the district, I think this would go away. But for the time being, and again, that's their policy piece, if a student didn't get an award and they saw the child of a councillor getting an award on that, what would be the perception in the community of that process undertaken? And I do note this has come up simply once in the history. It was, I believe it was your child, Councillor Zelka, and for this council to consider a policy change to direct the award of awards to influence, this is the kind of thing I think that would appear, to kind of express the need for that separation of the council and the arm's length awarding and because I think that perception, that potential perception of conflict of interest is so absolutely critical. I think I just can't. I think this piece I know is well intended, but I think it's very specific to a one-off case with an organization that we don't control, and it just seems not in the best interest of the district to manage it in this way. I think we're better off letting it manage itself. If it's part of the district and we decide to form a committee, then we should manage it as a committee. If it's arm's length, then we let them, then they can undertake this policy on their own behalf. But I think for us to direct it in the interest of our own children is just, it feels wrong to me. So I have a hard time supporting the motion as it's laid out here. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton, and then Councillor Patterson.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. And I would speak against the motion on the table, primarily because, picking up from what you had mentioned, it just, I'm not really comfortable with the idea that the main thrust of the motion is to direct the external ad hoc committee to do things or to conduct their business in a certain way with respect to how selections are made. And as multiple people have pointed out, individual councillors and individual employees of the district have to adhere to their standards of conflict of interest, which would apply in any case. So directing or requesting that the committee do or do not do certain things around that, I'm not comfortable with that because it, I think, detracts from the individual responsibility of councillors and staff to as far as the submission process. So just in its current form, I can't support it. Thank you.
Councillor Patterson, you had your hand up for a second time.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I don't know that overruling something because it is one incident is a way to validate overruling it, because as an incident comes up, then it warrants review at whenever it comes up. But if I might suggest, there seems to be some confusion around the council table as to what the structure, the mandate, and the membership of the committee is. And so I might therefore put forward an alternate motion that to, in fact, have a presentation, either in report form or as a representative coming to council, to review with council members what the program is, what the structure of the organization for oversight is, the mandate, and any policies that, in fact, are used to guide this process, so that at least we start from a point of clarity and can make decisions going forward with that. If there may not be financial contributions by the district, but even if it is staff time or use of staff resources, I think it would be appropriate that that members of council understand fully. And I think Councillor Braithwaite admirably has provided leadership for the program for a number of years, and has tried to ensure that the program will continue beyond the point where she may not be participating or overseeing it. So it would be, I think, a good thing for us to get a presentation to council, so that we were all clearly informed as to what the organization is about, the mandate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. My only warning on that one is there are like hundreds of various little things that go on that staff help with and we don't contribute to, so if not, yeah, fair enough. This is what's on the floor right now. So, but the motion that we have in front of us is as laid out here, which is to request the ad hoc committee to find a way to allow students associated with Oak Bay be eligible for nomination to the S Awards. Any other discussion on this item? Go ahead, Councillor Ne.
I'll speak to, I'm
Okay, got it.
yeah, thanks. I really appreciate where Councillor Zelka is coming from, because there's an unjustness that, you know, somebody on council child is not able to participate in this really well-received event in the community. But the way it is right now for me, it's a conflict. It becomes a conflict of interest, and it would be perceived to be that, and it's unfortunate. And I can't think off the cuff how else this could sort of roll out without there being the perception of a conflict of interest. If there was some other suggestion about how that could look, I'd be open to it. But as it stands right now, for me, it just sets up the potential for at least a perception of conflict of interest. So I'm not able to support it in its current form.
Thank you, Councillor Ne. Councillor Zelka, you had your hand up again.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll just try to be very brief. I use the word "find a way" in this because I don't really want to direct this external or ad hoc committee in the way that it can find an appropriate mechanism that, I would assume, from a transparency perspective, would deal with the perceived conflict of interest issues, whether it's double blind or whether it's a society or some other mechanism. I mean, that's up to them, them being the external body. So just simply asking that be made available, since there is an existing policy within the District of Oak Bay that is being applied, or appears to be being applied. I hear my colleagues suggest that there may still be a perceived conflict of interest, but the whole find a way process is to allow that to be resolved without directing how it could be resolved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you. Very quickly, I tend to agree with Councillor Ne. I don't think this is the place to be directing, or the place from which we are directing external bodies. I appreciate the concerns, but I also agree that the furthest away it is from this body and this process, the better it is. So, and that will avoid any potential conflict or perception of. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I don't see any other hands up, so I'm ready to call the question on the motion in front of us. Those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Ne, Appleton, Braithwaite, Green, and Murdoch opposed. That motion fails. So I'm not sure we can do a motion arising on a notice of motion, but I suppose we can. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
With respect to there being no terms of reference for this ad hoc committee or no memorandum of understanding, and noting Councillor Patterson suggested that some kind of information come back, I'd like to put a motion forward asking for a report to come back either from staff and to invite the external group to come forward and to share what is the arrangement with Oak Bay. Thank you.
I'm just seeing if there's a seconder for that motion. Go ahead, Councillor. Seconded. Councillor Zelka, that's a bit of a rambling motion. Can you repeat it for us so we have it clearly in writing? And we'll try and put it up on the screen if we can.
Ask staff to provide a report and to invite the committee, the Yes Awards Committee, to make a presentation to Council with the intention of finding out what is the relationship between District of Oak Bay and the Yes Awards Committee. Thank you.
And you're restricting this motion to only the Yes Awards Committee, not to all the other ad hoc pieces that work with our staff? Is that your intention?
I'm referring to the committee because this is we don't. It's an ad hoc committee, so and
when this motion arises, we can only deal with it relative to the original motion. So fair enough.
As mentioned in the background, there is no terms of reference pointed out by staff.
Okay, Councillor Zelka, is there anything more specific you're asking for it to be reported on besides just coming and presenting to Council? Trying to get some clarity of what the ask is here.
Oh, sorry, I thought I said that to find out what is the relationship between this external committee and District of Oak Bay, because I don't understand what the relationship is between the two, since it's sort of in, it's sort of out, it's sort of like where are the policies? I don't understand how this committee works. It has a valuable award. I don't want to damage the award in any way whatsoever, but I don't understand how the committee works. It's not transparent to me. I don't get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Okay, I'm just going to let the staff word it.
And if Councillor Patterson had a better wording with respect to the ideas that she brought forward, I would be fine for an amendment.
Sure, I'm just going to get the wording up on. We're. All right. As a seconder, do you want to add anything else? Councillor Patterson, did you want to add anything in terms of? You've heard the Councillor Zelka's comments. We're down to 3 minutes left of our extended time into motions. So go ahead if you have anything else to add. No.
I just would like to add that it comes back to there's one incident that we are referring to, but really I would like to know, I guess, the mandate and the organization of of the committee and policy they have, not just on members of councils and family members or relations to members of council, but to the committee, because I would think that there would be even members of the committee, if it's a selection committee, there would be a policy on exclusions from who could qualify based on committee membership too. And I would think that that's a good process to have for any ad hoc committees that we have for the district, to have something documented on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton. You want to add something? And I'll have something to say.
Yeah, I'm not going to vote in favor of what's on the table because I tend to concur with a comment that you made about just in terms of these are operational matters. There are existing guidelines that are available, so this information is available through staff about it, and so I take this in the same vein as any other operational matter that council might want to inquire about with respect to staff. I think that information is there. I'm not sure that we want to allocate the resources to have a presentation come back to council. So I think that information is accessible to council members already.
Yeah, I'm going to just speak. Again, I'm not sure what the motivation or intention of this is. There's a lot of ad hoc committees out there. I appreciate this has got more visibility, and I think the sense of urgency on this one is not there for me. I think I could see if there was in time that this was causing any kind of problems, but it's operated in such high capacity with such positivity in the community to date. I'm really having a hard time understanding why to spend staff time and ad hoc committee time coming before here to justify their existence when it's just done so much good. So I can't support the motion as it's laid out here. Councillor Green, did you want to add? Sorry, I thought you moved to the.
Sorry, I was just going to say that, I think staff have heard the discussion, which I think is useful, and they've been in the room, and perhaps as part of a new council orientation, the S Awards program could be rolled into that binder with all the parameters, and so that every new council member is aware.
So we're in the last minute here. I'm going to have to call the question, I think, unless there's a motion to extend. I don't know that would have success, so I think I'm going to call the question. Any other discussion to squeeze it in here? No. All those. So the motion on the floor is as laid out there to ask staff and the committee to provide a presentation to council to explain the relationship between the district and the S Awards. Okay, all those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Ne, Appleton, Braithwaite, Green, and Murdoch opposed. That fails. I need a motion to adjourn, I think, at this point, unless any other motions arising. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We are going to go back into an existing in-camera meeting, so we'll turn off the live stream. We'll take a 5-minute break, but I don't think we have a lot of extension required, but we need to clear the room until